So you guys know the deal. We've done this like 3 weeks now, or 2 other weeks. This will be the 3rd week, where I don't know. I just get some of my friends on the stream, and we just make a top 10 list. We each make our top 10 lists, have chat vote on them at the end. Previously, we had done them based on the release of a Haruma Red video, and then we've also compared it to that at the end. After looking at the content a few times, I don't think that part's really important at all. I guess really it just kind of gave me the idea to do it. But I'm just going to continue doing that, and I think for the rest of this alpha and beta cycle, I really like this idea for content. Just like one of the 2 days of the weekend, get all the boys on the stream, and have like rotating guests and stuff, depending on the topic. And just come up with each of your own top 10s, and it creates like an interesting discussion point for all the things at different ranks. So I just want to keep doing it. I have a lot of fun doing it, and I think it's great yap content for the chat. So, okay, here we go. Joining the call. Hello?
I'm late to the call.
Dude, I'm fucking late. You guys started this call without me. Holy shit.
Yeah, we're already talking.
Very punctual. All right, cool.
Yeah, we're on number 8.
You guys have just... Oh, you've just been going already. Okay.
Yeah, we already started.
We've been explaining the rules to Dorki, but I don't think it's been sinking in.
Nah, it's fine.
He still doesn't know. Yeah, well, like someone will have it on their list, and everyone else will be like, "I have that higher," and he's like, "I have it at number 3." Like exactly. You did. I'm pretty sure he did that the first time we did this.
Well, look, if I have it at 3, then I have it at 3. Like, what do you mean?
Before we start, was there any revelations you guys had when making your list? This one was actually harder to make.
This was hard to make.
Yes,
Yeah.
that was exactly
There are
the same
so many
thing.
dungeons I want to put on here.
Oh wow, really?
I had the
I
opposite
was about
effect.
to say, I'm an enjoyer.
Same.
Yeah,
I
I,
feel like-
like a
yeah,
bottom
I'm
5
not
was
like
really
either.
easy. Spots like 6 through 10 is a lot more,
There's a lot more
marginal.
give and take, and there's also a lot of different reasons as to what makes things bad. So in my head, I was like trying to weigh like how important those were of like against each other.
It's also hard to rank them. Like, because I
Yeah.
feel like, a lot of them feel like they belong to F tier. So, like, if they're belonging to F tier, then it's like, how do you order them,
I don't know. For me, number 1 was easy. Was the easiest
Okay,
part.
okay.
Yeah, number
Alright,
one was
I'm
also the
curious.
easiest for me.
All right.
And also, again, I think it's just going to be interesting because all of us have our different perspectives. Like, I noticed for some of these, my chat was like, how did you not put this dungeon on the list? And then I was thinking about it, and I'm like, well, I only tanked that season, and it was actually really, really fun to tank this dungeon. And another thing that I found really important is a big thing with a lot of people in my chat, and I think just a lot of people in general, is they really don't like how affixes interact with you when you are in close quarters and your camera is all fucky.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
That is the chat.
I mean, nobody likes close.
I'm
quarters in
super
general.
weird, I think, but that has never mattered to me, and I've never felt that. Like, I've never felt that being a negative. I've never felt constrained by a camera and, like, super ticked off by it. Like, that just doesn't... So, like, when you remove that, it takes a few dungeons that would be obvious inclusions, and I ended up enjoying them, especially depending on what role I played. So that'll make my list kind of weird. How are you guys on things like that, by the way? Are you guys affix camera angle dislikers?
It's definitely a huge impact, especially when you get by some mechanic that you feel wronged by. It happens a lot where, maybe there's like a swirly where it's like, there's no shot at hitting me, but then like, it's impossible to see anyway. So it's like, GG, like, what do you do? It happens.
All right, so you guys know the deal. I am going to have my thing on the screen here. I'll go ahead and just share it for you guys too if you want to follow along so you don't have to like watch my stream, although I would appreciate the +1. But all right, so it looks like the person who made this, the order I think might be the same as last time. Chad, if you guys had to guess, what do you guys think is going to be the consensus, meaning the like, our point system works like this. If you're ranked in the 10th, you get 1 point. If you're ranked first, you get 10 points. And then it combines the points of all 4 of our list. What dungeon is going to be generally considered the worst? Keep in mind that some people may not dislike like certain aspects of dungeons. Like it may not affect them. Similar to me with like the camera angle thing. Oh, I have to move chat. Shit. Oh, they're all saying...
I expect Dratnos is going to be a fan favorite here. I think Dratnos is linked in with the chat when it comes to bad dungeons.
Okay,
I think we're going to have some
100%.
disagreements.
I was talking about this recently. Dratnos has like far and away won all of these so far.
gonna
Where
win this
Chad
one,
voted
too.
on his thing. Do you guys think Dratnos has like the most in-tuned based community take, relatable community take, or do you think he's fake as fuck and made his list?
He's fake as fuck.
That's what I
He's
think
fake
too.
as hell. It's
No,
not
no, I'm a
even
man of the people.
close. Man
No.
of the people. Oh, man.
Man of the
Dratnos won.
people.
Dratnos won with dungeons.
Unless it comes to
but-
raid.
when it was raid, I actually had an overwhelming majority. I think when it comes to these things, it's whoever is like closest to the, you know what I mean?
Whoever's whoever
takes it the least seriously is probably most.
Yeah, that's kind of true, actually. Yeah. Like Dratnos is a very hardcore raider nowadays.
Yep. Dude, Dratnos used to be like the Mythic Plus guy. He was like the fucking Dratty
Dude,
routes.
this is what I said last night too.
What?
Like, yeah, he was VM. Like, I missed Dratnos when he was VM plus guy. He doesn't even do Dratnos weekly routes anymore.
Wait, Dratnos, what
That's
changed
how you know
with that?
He fell off.
Was it a passion diff?
Yeah, limited amount of it's doesn't hit the same that it used to, and I don't have the desire to like play 8 hours a day of M plus every day for a season.
Would you say BFA was the best expansion?
Like raid has just gotten more and more fun for me as well.
Did you know that Dratnos was one of the first high M plusers that I played with? He probably doesn't remember, but I remember
it was like a Siege of Boralus or something.
It was a Tol Dagor, and I remember specifically linking the damage meters in my like casual friends Discord when I was a noob, being like, "Oh my god, this rogue just did so much damage."
Yo, holy shit! I got to play with Dratnos, man.
Yeah, I linked a screenshot of
Dratnos. Now you think of Dratnos, and you're like, "Man, this guy's just a fucking raider."
Yeah, well, I actually one of my first high M plusers that I played with Dorki, but I
was in high M plus.
He didn't finish the key with me.
Dude, speaking of like doing dungeons with people and also randomly also a rogue, do you guys remember James come up in, was it Shadowlands beta, where he was like annoying?
Oh, yeah.
He was like annoying everyone.
Oh, yeah, wait, hold on. Quick story, dude. So I was watching one of the Chinese VODs, right? Like one of the high Chinese M plus tank VODs, Anuo, the guy who played for Aster. And so I'm just randomly skimming through his VODs, and I see him reacting to a Chinese video going over the ambition nonverbal drama. And there's a whole video covering the topic. It was like translated. The guy was like, talking about like what exactly happened, how it broke down, and he was talking about how like he played with James during the Shadowlands beta.
He has a connection to the Chinese community, and WoW, he is like really good friends with this rogue theory crafter guy, and like every time a new patch comes out, he'll like, or especially when the rogue rework happened, he was up until like 5 a.m. one night, staying up with a translator, talking to this rogue guy about like all the new rogue changes and like theory crafting together. I was like, dude, that is crazy dedication.
Dude, the beta cycle as well, when like all the regions get to play together. It's such a good time for like that.
Oh, it was great. I remember the first time I got to play with that group, and the China squad, or one of them at the time. And I remember I joined the group, and they like, "Wow, you know Dorki. He is the god of bear." God, I'm just like, oh my god.
That's so good. Alrighty.
Could everyone play Pro Warrior except Dorki?
Yeah, I am excited to start this. I think the first half of all of these lists are going to be super interesting, like the 10 through 5, because at least what a couple of you were saying earlier, and I definitely agree with, is like that was not easy. Like I think that my like top 5 were pretty easy. But I think the bottom 5 are going to have a lot of different picks. Like I think they're between there's going to be 20 of our top 5 between the 4 of us. I bet there will be above 10 dungeons in those. I think there will be a lot.
I think so too.
All right, let's I guess we started with me last time. Let's start with Dratnos this time. Dratnos, what's your 10?
Uldaman, Legacy of Tyr.
I do not have that on my list.
It's bottom one, very bottom one on the list.
It actually did not make my list either.
Dorki, did Uldaman make your list?
Nope.
Okay, this is really interesting. This was one that this is not on my list, and my chat was losing their mind as to how this was not on my list. So I was expecting it to be on all 3 of yours, but it looks like Dratnos only included it one time, and it's exactly 10, which is like the least offensive spot to put it.
It's a man of the people take.
That's right.
He's fake as hell.
Yeah, I don't actually mind this place, but I figured chat wouldn't like it, and I'm trying to score points with them, so I thought I'd put it on my list.
All right, what's your reason?
Okay, I mean, this dungeon is just too long. It's 5 bosses.
Too long? What? It's 35 minutes. Man. It's not even that long.
The time, like, this is one of those dungeons where you finish the 3rd boss and you're like, okay, I'm about ready for this dungeon to be done. And then there's still another half of the dungeon ahead of you. You kill the 4th boss, and then there's still like 4 pulls in the last boss, and you just feel like you've been in there for ages.
Okay, so I don't think it's long. It just feels long because there's shit happening the entire time. It's like action packed, but it's 35 minutes. It's not even long, like compared to the longer dungeons.
It's one of those ones though that I don't know. For me, there are some raid fights or whatever where it's like, wow, like Starkareth, for instance, a raid fight where it's like, this is actually a short fight, but it feels long because it's so exciting and jam packed with action. But this is one of the ones where it's like, okay, this is maybe a short amount of time, but it feels like a long time because it's just such a slog the whole way through.
It feels like it has one of those irrelevant intermission phases that just doesn't need to be there. Like if, for example, you were walking up to, is it Emberon? Is that the boss's name? Imagine you walked up to that part of the dungeon and it was just the last boss instead, and they cut out that entire last thing. It would just kind of be better, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you have some mobs in there that are just so annoying as well, right? Like you have the mobs that are like, I cast Curse of Stone on you, and then I also channel Hail of Stone, and it's like that one mob requires, 3 people to do stuff to it in a 10-second window to avoid it being a problem. And then you also want to pull big in that area, but you try and run that in a pug, somebody's getting cleaved by the mobs that randomly have a cleave in that area. You have like the mobs at the end of the dungeon that are just going to slowly steal everybody's haste and do a bunch of damage to everybody. So there's like a bunch of pulls in there that are super obnoxious if not handled very precisely. And that I think makes it pretty annoying.
It's the bosses, man. The bosses are oppressive as hell, especially this week on Jericho. So I did like 5 Uldamans last night on stream. I'm sure some people were watching, and I depleted every single one of them. I was just pugging keys. And I've seen like the most common pug route is you rush to Bromac so that you have Lust on Bromac, and then you wipe to Bromac and zone out. Like that seems to be like the most common route that people are doing.
Yeah.
I've done that
it's actually
a few times.
I think the problem with Uldaman is it suffers from the Dragonflight bloat, where there's too much happening. They need to just like trim down the amount of mechanics in that dungeon.
Yeah, especially because it's not like there are the same mobs throughout the whole dungeon, right? It's not like, oh, there's 3 mobs you can learn. Every single dungeon, like the trash, the bosses all have kind of different mechanics from each other, and there's so many different flavors of them, right? There's like 4 trash sections and 5 bosses, each of which have their own. Like the only through line is, I guess, the stun trash, and then the stun boss is kind of, you could learn the one from the other, and that's a similarity. But other than that, it's like all different stuff that you have to keep in your head to do that plays.
I want to say Uldaman didn't make my list for one major reason. It did like feel too long. I think people also did complain about camera angles and affixes and stuff in here. Again, I do not dislike that really, or that has not affected me. I only tanked this dungeon ever. It was in season 2. I was playing Druid. It was really fun. And I loved tanking this dungeon. Like the pulls you did as a tank felt like you were really challenged and you had a lot going on. And I just found that to be really fun with very little downside. I loved the even like the little babby kiting you did around like the snake boss to like pull mobs into him. Like that felt challenging, but in a different way. All of the pulls felt like you were at risk of death permanently, and you were doing pulls big enough to where you constantly felt like you could die if you messed up. And that was just super fun. You could also find people that maybe have that as a negative, but I thought that was really fun.
I actually hard agree with you, Max. You keep going.
I mean, you can go. That was basically all I had.
I was just say I would have this is on my potential list, but I didn't put it there just because it was actually engaging the entire time. Like it was action packed. You felt like the tank was on the constant verge of death. The healer was constantly having to heal. You had to do big pulls. You had to do stops. There was a lot going on, and that it's kind of like the Sanguine Depths effect. Like I wouldn't say I loved this dungeon. I didn't put it in my top 10 favorite dungeon, of course, but it was similar to Sanguine Depths where it was actually engaging. But obviously, I can see why it's highly this.
All right, so Uldaman, surprising, only one entry, and it's at the 10. Which I think what we kind of mentioned before we started with this is that there's a lot of dungeons that are going to be closer to 10 that are not super offensive. It was not easy to make. There hasn't been, contrary to a lot of people's belief, especially recency bias with expansions, there haven't been a lot of true universal. You play every role. Casual or hardcore turbo stinkers. There actually hasn't been a ton of those, which is what I found by making this list, but interesting nonetheless. Uldaman. All right, Dorki, what is your 10?
Necrotic Wake.
Ooh.
I have it higher.
Okay, I'm definitely interested in seeing that. Wait, Necrotic Wake might not exist on my. Oh nope, it has the in front of it. Found it. All right, we have it higher on him. Growl, what is your 10?
My 10 is Neltharions Lair.
Ooh, I like the choice. I thought about it. Does anyone have Neltharions Lair higher? All right, let's get it. Neltharions Lair, what's your take, Growl?
And it's hard for me to talk about Legion dungeons as much because I didn't play Legion, but this was one of them that was brought back. I mean, I hated the underground dark gross theme. It was extremely linear with very little choices as to what you pull. I felt a lot of the bosses in general were just really gimmicky and didn't really work. The first boss, the way the ads worked, you would always have that one guy who's still hitting the boss and then he spawns an ad and then it blows up your group. The mechanic where you're just not supposed to move like because of the spikes is like really annoying if you ever get knocked away. The second boss with like the whatever you call it, the shifting cups game or whatever, that boss like just didn't really work and it felt really stupid. The last boss was also like really weird. There was like this RNG lava puddle that like threw random stuff at people. In general, the trash too it just felt like really overtuned. Like those Dominator guys, like the scorpions at the end, you literally had to like skip one of them and it was in the boss room, but it was so nasty that you don't even fight it. The pelters as well, like if you were in an organized group that did all these like crazy mind soothe skips and like hugged the right walls, you could get through it, but like most groups I assume just got owned by the pelters. I don't know, in general it's just like nothing really in that dungeon to me felt good or rewarding or fun. Like I couldn't really think of like that many, like nothing was really like super atrocious, but it just felt like that dungeon does not have very many redeeming qualities.
Even worse in Legion.
It was worse in Legion. I want to mention some redeeming qualities for me. I think the first pull in that dungeon is one of the best pulls in Mythic Plus ever. The pull all the way up into the big rock guy and like AoE down all the mobs, specifically as a tank. But I also think big pulls in general are fun. That one doesn't feel too unfair with mechanics, but does still feel challenging at the same time.
Man, that's a pull where that's how you do it, but how every other person does it is your tank starts tagging mobs. It doesn't tag one of the mobs, and then it rips on your
runs at the healer.
DPS.
Yeah.
Then the tank panics. The tank goes to 1% health, and then he pops every defensive, then dies anyway. And then you try, and then your mage presses Bloodlust, and then you die, and then you try and do it again. At that pull, I mean, I agree when it's done right in a good group, it's fun,
Yeah.
but that's not how it went in Pugs.
Dorky, how do you feel about the last boss in there as a tank? I think it's one of the most interesting like
I
tank
thought it was
bosses.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the more interesting bosses. There's like an actual strategy behind it, and it's like it's super tech. It's one of the most technical bosses in M Plus actually at a very high level. But it's also kind of bullshit.
Yeah,
There
like
were a lot of bullshit moments.
like the amount of when you're at a high enough key level, the amount of tank busters, like the amount of things that happen that require you to have a cooldown for are insane, and some classes just didn't have enough. Dratty?
Yeah, this was a middle of the pack dungeon for me. Like I had a lot of fun in there, but I agree that these pain points were pretty valid. The pelters in particular on Fortified was extremely annoying part of the dungeon that just seemed kind of, I don't know, wrong.
Oh yeah, those circles that you literally like needed a weak aura.
Oh
to
yeah, the
step out
avalanche dodge. Yeah,
instantaneously,
the
or it just
breakers.
kills you. Yep.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
That was obnoxious. The last boss as well. If you were on high Tyran, you didn't run into this very much because like you had to be in pretty high Tyran for this to be a thing. But like the 4-minute overlap on that boss was.
Oh yeah, you just die if you get to that point in the fight.
Yeah,
I didn't
you
mention
had
that because like I
basically nothing you could
assumed,
do.
but yeah, that was awful.
Yeah.
What do you guys think about the totem game?
Yeah, reasonably fun. I don't know. I mean, like anytime you screwed it up, it was always really bad.
Yeah, like-
but it was really funny.
It was really funny. I also have seen like pretty much every group mess that up. Like it sounds like something where you like get it in your head and you're like, I'll never fuck this up, and then like you can just get a lineup where you actually goof it. I've seen like pretty much
Yeah.
everyone goof that.
Oh yeah, it 100% gets fucked up sometimes. Like if anyone says they never fuck it up, they're lying.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I don't know. It's hard because like I wanted to have this on my list, but there's just too many dungeons to put on the list. I think it's hard to put Legion dungeons because a lot of Legion dungeons or I mean, I loved Legion M Plus, so it's like hard for me to put them on. But at the same time, a lot of Legion dungeons were kind of stinkers.
Yeah, so I was just talking about this with my stream before we started this, which is it's going to be really hard to rank Legion dungeons because in your head you could be like, man, a lot of the stuff that we've learned is bad about Mythic Plus dungeons now like totally existed there. Like this dungeon was way too long. It had like all this shit going on. It was like really class restrictive. And then it's like Legion was just a different time. Like Mythic Plus was new and everything was great. And it's just hard to actually do that. Like it's possible they could bring that dungeon back and it would be awful, but like you just remember it for the time that it existed. Like for me, it was Arcway. Maybe someone has Arcway on their list, but like I think if they brought Arcway back, even with some decent changes, I think it would be just fucking awful. But like I don't remember Arcway being bad. It's like kind of how I thought about Court of Stars before they brought it back. Like I just think it's so long ago that it's hard to judge them how they are because it's been 8 years, man. Like so much of it has changed in what we expect from these dungeons.
Also, I mean, the game was just really fun at the time, like gameplay wise.
Yeah.
I do think it's fair to be like, look, you get more of a pass for being an old dungeon, right? Like, if they make a mistake or something bad about a dungeon the first time they are doing M plus dungeons versus the third expansion or the fourth expansion, like I don't know, I think it's fair to have less points taken off for those errors.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I'm I'm gonna take this back to current expansion. I have Neltharus in my 10 spot. Any Neltharus havers?
No, but that's good. I kind of forgot about that dungeon's problems, and maybe I should have had that on my list.
I like how every
it's also
time
a
we're like,
contender.
we don't have it on each other's list. We're just like, nope, but we should have. Like, oh, that's
Yeah.
not a bad
Well, I
one.
mean, like, yeah, that's what I said. Like, a lot of these are just like contenders, but I can't. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, so
There's
Neltharus suffers from the obvious issue that is kind of a theme in my list, but this is what I had like 3 or 4 other dungeons to put in this slot, and what made me decide on Neltharus was just the chains thing. Like anytime you have a dungeon where random gimmick kills a large percentage of your trash count, I think that's just fucking dog shit. And I think it's really bad. Apparently they made that better this patch.
Yeah, it's
fun-
pretty much gone.
Yeah, fun thing about
Yeah, the
that,
chains
I
are pretty
haven't played this
non-factor.
patch, so my only experience with Neltharus ever was doing it then. This is surprising to me, kind of the opposite of Brackenhide. At the beginning of the expansion, during Mythic Zeros, like when we weren't preparing to do like Neltharus Brackenhide and shit because it was in season 2. We were just like thinking about what they would be like on Mythic Plus. And 2 opinions that were pretty popular was like, man, Brackenhide is going to be the worst Mythic Plus dungeon of all time. And it ended up being pretty good. And it was like, Neltharus is going to be just a banger, right? The aesthetic is really cool. The bosses are really cool. And then it came out and just kind of didn't end up playing out like that to me. It was a late inclusion, and I don't feel super strongly about it. I just think it's hard. It's crazy that they kind of messed up the aesthetic. It didn't work out too well. Some general issues in the dungeon, but what really put it on there was just the chains thing.
Yeah, I think the
Yeah.
chains are really bad. One of the things that I liked about Neltharus, the reason it didn't make it on my list, other than being benched for all of season 2, was I really like the dungeon is somewhat linear, but there's lots of different trash mobs, and you sort of can pick and choose. So, like, it's not really super confusing for someone who's just trying to do a weekly and hold W, but there is some mastery involved in, like, oh, let's do a lot of trash at the end, or let's do no trash at the end, or let's pull all this stuff that's in this room. Like, I feel like I really like that. I like that they give you the options, but it's not necessarily making it, like, more complicated or, like, too open-ended in a way.
I normally dislike Neltharus, but I've been playing healer recently, and I actually kind of like healing Neltharus. It's one of my preferred dungeons as a healer
Yeah.
this season.
The bosses
So
are
there's-
pretty cool also.
Yeah, there's like a good mix. Like there's a good amount of healing, but at the same time, there's like a good amount of like just like in between time where you're just like doing things. Like in the beginning of the dungeon, I'm like focused on healing the tank and stopping the magma conflags, and then like there's the magma boss, and then like after the magma boss, I'm just like worrying about the hunters, and then it is like a very good mix of everything in that dungeon, and it doesn't feel too oppressive. But it's definitely not one of my favorite dungeons or hate dungeons. It's like very mid.
Okay, Dratnos, what's your 9?
Necrotic Wake.
And I think this is the only other Necrotic Wake,
Yeah, I
right?
think I'm the highest one of it.
All right, both you and Dorki, what's your bit?
So there are some positives to Necrotic Wake. It was like an easy dungeon relative to the others that season, so I think that causes a lot of people to have pretty positive sentiments about it, because if you were offered, like, hey, do you want a 10 Necrotic Wake, or do you want a 10 Theater of Pain, or do you want a 10, Sanguine Depths or whatever, like the Necrotic Wake was the easy answer. That was the key you were most likely to time. So that's why chat is revolting against this choice, I think, mostly because there were a lot of problems with this dungeon too. First off, the starting area of the dungeon was extremely restrictive in terms of what you could do, because there were a bunch of Zul'Ramis gatekeepers that were just 5 key levels harder than the rest of the dungeon. If you pulled any of those guys, it was over. You were going to the super Shadowlands where you died twice, and that's where you go. If you were doing the rest of the dungeon as well, there were a lot of pulls that, as you tried to do this key at a higher and higher level, became more and more reliant on basically pulling everything together and then using one of the weapons that's lying around to kill the entire pack for you, to kill multiple packs all at the same time. If you screwed that up once, you were going, you were out of there, that dungeon was depleted. And then the end of the dungeon, you finish off the second boss, right? So you do this kind of nice long walk to the second boss or whatever. You skip a bunch of stuff. Sure, there's a mini boss there that's maybe kind of interesting or whatever. You kill the second boss. Then you head up to this, the floating ziggurat thing up in the sky. And there's like 5 trash pools patrolling around. And you're like, okay, all right, I kill these 5 trash packs. Like, all right, it's boss time. No, it's not boss time. It's gauntlet time. And now you fight 3 long-ass, boring pulls. You're just sitting there waiting for each one to be done. You can't do anything else during them because of how it works. And then you get to do a boss. And that you're just like...
And that boss kind of stinks, too.
Yeah.
Absolute stinkers.
So, again, like, it's only number 9 on my list. It wasn't that atrocious, but I think these were pretty negative qualities of the dungeon. And in particular, the weapon interaction and the Zul'Rama's gatekeeper mobs being in the state that they were in felt like really unfortunate things that held that dungeon back a lot.
Yeah, the more I think about it, the worse the dungeon is, because like especially with how buggy the Necropolis was. Like I'm not sure if you guys remember, but like so many abilities just didn't work there. It was so obnoxious, and the geometry required in some pug situations was fucking awful. Like I've seen some real shit with the cleavers upstairs. Also, like the last two bosses were terrible. I don't know how you could even do the last two bosses without items. Like the whole entire strategy in that dungeon was save all your items so that you can kill the last two bosses, especially on Tyrannical. If you couldn't get past those last two dungeons, it was GG. Or bosses, I mean, in that dungeon. And yeah, it was just, I don't know. There were just so many things I didn't like about Necrotic Wake.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I almost regret not including it. It was very, very close to making it on my list. I can't really think of very many good parts to it. I mean, it was kind of fun. I guess like the fact that it was easy and had weapons like was sort of like Junkyard in a way that it was like, you know, it was fun to use all this stuff, but at the same time, like if you weren't super coordinated using everything perfectly, like it would
didn't
still
really
be
feel
fine.
easy, though.
I mean, yeah. Well, when you did it, well, the problem is you were doing it at like plus 32 or whatever because it was so easy. Like compared to the other dungeons at the other levels, I think it would have been easy. But yeah, I don't know. I think, I guess my thoughts were like, I thought the bosses were okay, except for maybe the last boss. I thought the boss fights were decent, and I thought that like the beginning area had enough like variety and different routing and like skips and stuff that it wasn't that bad. But yeah, it's pretty bad.
I actually really liked the first area, like just in general. Just as a DPS player only, just doing the first area was really fun.
Yeah, the first boss as well, like with Trash, was a fun pull.
Also
although a lot of that was because you had those Kyrian anima orbs,
yeah.
So if you ever wiped and you didn't have it, that was a go out, you know, try it on 2 chests of 17 or whatever.
I also think there's an interesting way that certain easier dungeons in a pool interact with the community, where higher key groups end up disliking a key relatively a little more because it ends up being the key they have to do as like a homework key to push keys up. And then also on the contrary, if you do dungeons purely for the weekly loot, you end up actually doing a lot of the easier dungeons on 20, and you end up enjoying them more because they're just an easier route to get gear. So I think that's always an interesting bias I see from people in chat and from you guys sometimes, that like it seems like there will always be people who feel a little bit better or worse about keys just because of how they interacted with them.
It's like, do you have a positive or negative sentiment towards Shadowmoon Burial Grounds? I think is a good way of kind of.
I have it higher.
No,
I know.
I know.
I know.
Or not yet.
Yeah. Okay. Dorki, what's your 9?
I have Court of Stars.
Ooh,
Oh,
wow.
Holy moly.
Wow.
Oh, I wanted to put that on my list, and I was gonna
Good
get
lord.
gunned down.
So-
I wanted to put it on my list, but I was gonna get gunned down. All right, let's see.
So wait, so no one else has it, right? Dratnos, you don't have it?
Correct, yeah.
Wow. Okay, Dorki, say it.
Wow, I actually would have put it higher before, but recency bias, I put it a little bit higher up just because like I feel like it's a little bit less offensive nowadays. It's just, I don't know, it's just an awful dungeon. Like the amount of bullshit RP, the amount of bad camera angles. Like when we're talking about bad camera angles, Jesus Christ, the trees absolutely hide the fuck out of every single mechanic. There are like way too many frontals in the first area. The first boss was dog shit, and I think the whole like requirement of professions or specific classes or like, you know, whatever it may be, specific racials in that entire second boss area sucked. There's also like way too much butt pulling. The whole, you have to figure out how to maneuver around the Court of Stars and like not pull random shit was pretty bad. And just like the mini bosses, the Enforcer, like the idea of like you having to just line of sight every single one of those is like, why is that even a mechanic? Like who even thought about this as a mechanic? Surely there's like some other way of playing it. In fact, during beta, they changed it so that it was a kick, so that you can interrupt. But they figured it was too easy, so they changed it back to where you have to line of sight. Like, why is that a mechanic? And aside from that, I mean, the last two bosses were actually okay. Like, I thought those bosses were okay, so I didn't put it as low as I would have before it came back to M+, or, like, you know, in Dragonflight.
Yeah, I agree with everything you say, other than I actually think the last two bosses were like very, very, very fun. I thought they were like two of the coolest bosses, and that to me is what saves a dungeon. But yeah, I think Court of Stars is this really weird like pseudo options, you know, where it feels like you have a lot of options, but really you don't, right? Like all the trash in the first area sucks, like it's just miserable. You're trying to pull like very little of it, or like only the birds. And then like you have to have every single important profession, you know, you have to have like NG and stuff, and then it's like you have to do every one of the enforcers, like you have to do, it's like, I don't know, it makes you feel like you have a lot of choices in different routes, but really everyone just is doing the same thing.
Yeah, it's one of those easy dungeons that people like to do for loot, but like when it came to actually playing the dungeon more than getting loot, it felt awful. It felt awful. It felt like homework keys that weren't actually homework.
I also think that they messed up the like mini bosses attached to the second boss pretty bad. Like similar to how I've complained about Kurog in the past, where it just seems like design failure. And maybe this is just it used to be made like this kind of thing, and they didn't recook it for when they brought it back. But like after we've seen Awakened, that seems like a perfect Awakened kind of thing, where like the mini bosses are a choice. And you could choose to do the boss with them, and it would be like dealing with 1, 2, 3, or 4 awakened mobs that come with different challenges of killing them beforehand or killing them then. And they just made it, well, the boss just does infinite more damage and has infinite more health, so it's really not a choice outside of like some MDI kiting shenanigans. And I just think that's a missed opportunity. Also, the having to like go kill the like kind of the point of them was like, oh well, you have to kill these mobs, and like the enforcers are going to spawn in random spots, which is like tied to the mini bosses, and like that means you're never going to do exactly the same trash in the same order when you get to that part of the dungeon. You kind of improvise a little bit. I think that part was like somewhat of a plus, but I don't know, in practice it was probably more annoying than it was cool. So yeah, this dungeon, fully admit, I used to say Court of Stars is like one of the best dungeons ever. It has an amazing aesthetic. I think in Legion it played out really well. When they brought it back, I don't know if they made a lot of changes that made it worse, or if it was just like porting a Legion dungeon into what current dungeons are. But the most recent time it was out significantly reduced my opinion of it. It didn't make my list, but it was close.
Yeah, this one and Neltharus, I think for me, were both saved by having some boss fights that were just really fun. I think that otherwise, though, it's I mean, I would say Court of Stars for me is probably like middle of the pack for me of all dungeons now. And I agree, back in Legion I would have, or like back before it came back, I would have been like, yeah, this is one of the best dungeons of all time, they should bring it back.
Is this also a casualty of it being a high key, you do this a million times a season thing too?
I think also potentially a casualty of it being one of the, like, it and Shadowmoon Burial Grounds being a couple key levels easier than the rest, so you played it so often.
And you lumped them in together kind of thing, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I was surprised to see Court. But also maybe another thing for Court, and maybe this isn't fair, but like if you were to put Court of Stars, the exact same dungeon, anywhere but the like Nighthold or Suramar aesthetic, I think it would be like on everyone's list. But maybe that's not fair because that adds 2 other dungeons too, right? So.
Oh yeah, Suramar's the best.
Okay, Growl, what's your 9?
My number 9 is Plaguefall.
That is not on my list. Sounds like it's on no one's
I had
list.
as a contender, but no.
Interesting. I mean, I can kind of see the case. What's your case for Plaguefall?
Well, it's hard to nail it down because it had so many different iterations and it was so bad throughout the entire expansion. I would say my first point in contention is how many just like absolutely miserable areas there were to play, namely anything that had to do with the tentacles that would come out of the ground. If you ever pulled one and you didn't realize it or you didn't want to fight it, it would just shoot your party from infinite range and stack a poison until you died. And it was like sort of mandatory in a way, but there were like weird ways to skip them. They also gave 0 count, so it felt terrible whenever you had to fight them. The first and second boss was insanely miserable to pug, mainly because it relied heavily on needing to like CC and not break CC on ads, and no one ever does that. And so you would always have moments where like people are not on the same page, and like the blob would get broken and Globgrog would get huge, or the DR slime would be on top of the bomb and you can't kill it on the second boss. And also, yeah, there was like a lot of weird interactions in Shadowlands that would break CCs. If you remember, like, the weird stuff that people would do to pull through walls. Like, you would do damage to mobs just by having it selected and proccing damage events on it. That was miserable. Also, the other thing about Plaguefall was there was mobs everywhere that would do this stacking, insanely nasty disease on the tank, where it would, like, you'd lose, like, half of your stats, and it was 30 seconds long, and it essentially meant if you didn't have a disease dispel healer, you just couldn't even do the dungeon. Like, you would just not even invite, like, Resto Druids or, like, Shamans to the group because they couldn't remove the disease, and it was literally untankable with how much damage some of those packs did. And yeah, Plague Borders. I'm not even gonna get started on those.
Yeah, mandatory dispel profiles are some of the worst things in M+. I don't know why it's still a thing. I mean, I know why it's still a thing, but I don't know why they're so insistent on it. I would want to put Plaguefall really high myself, but I thought about it and I felt like, when it came to playing it in high keys, it wasn't like the worst thing ever, just because you would usually have a strategy. But I do remember early on, I absolutely disliked Plaguefall, and when people didn't know what they were doing, it was awful. But once you figure it out, it's not the worst.
Oh, remember the
Still pretty
first
bad, though.
area with the nests? Like, no one even remembers that because you didn't do it, but remember the mushrooms and the nests and stuff?
Yeah.
There were so many parts of that dungeon that you literally just couldn't even interact with or go near because they were so miserable.
What about the aesthetic? Did they nail? I think like they kind of nailed the aesthetic, right?
I mean, nailed in
it's a
terms of
shitty
how do we...
aesthetic.
Yeah, like,
Okay.
how do we
Nailed
make
in terms
this
of how awful it
miserable and
looks.
green puke aesthetic? Like, yeah, they did a great job.
Yeah, I mean,
Also,
it's kind of
they only paid the Margrave Shardama voice actors for like one line, right? My house weeps with blight. They just spam that at you every
Shields.
5 seconds.
I've never heard that. I think they
You gotta play with Game Sound, man.
yeah, I actually started doing that recently. I don't know. I think the Plague Boar thing was one of the funniest things of all time. I didn't do the dungeon in this expansion a lot, but I remember watching that and being amazed at how the dungeon was actually working. The main thing you said that made me agree with you, Growl, is everything about the tentacles in the dungeon were horrible. Like the gating and having to wait and kill one mob, and if you like accidentally pulled a different one, it would that was just horrible. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I necessarily hated or really liked it. I also think it's funny that Dorki, every time someone's mentioning a bad dungeon, like all of us were like, man, doing 5 to 10 was hard because all these dungeons have some positives to them, and Dorki's like a Olympic tier hater. He's like, every dungeon, he's like, making my top 10 was easy, and then every time someone's mentioning a dungeon that wasn't his top 10, he's like, damn, I could have had that really high on my list. he just fucking hates
Look,
everything.
man, there are a lot of stinkers. It is what it is, right?
Yeah. All right. My 9 is Nokhud Offensive.
So I have it higher.
Okay.
Ooh, okay.
Ooh.
Dratnos, what's your 9?
All right, we already did my 9. I think you want my 8.
Oh, I want your 8. Yeah.
The Other Side.
Ooh.
Wow.
Ooh.
I want to clarify, this is only Season 1 Shadowlands, The Other Side. I actually think it improved a lot over in the later seasons, but...
Yeah, I loved
Wait,
it.
what did it even improve?
So, okay, does anybody else have this on the list? No?
Does not
Nope.
sound like it now.
All right, so yeah, DOS was actually pretty great in Encrypted Season because you got the Woe Drifter, you could zoom around that place, it was kind of sweet. Before then, you had just like a 30-year walk between the different wings of that dungeon, and particularly in Prideful Season, you had this exciting experience of, we need to kill the Pride before Hakar, before they nerfed Hakar like 7 times. We need to kill the Pride before Hakar. We need to make sure we proc the Pride at the exact right spot. So we have to pull in like a very rote fashion in the whole dungeon to get our Prides at the right spots. And then we have to kill Hakar with this Pride buff, because if we wipe and we don't have a Pride buff for Hakar, it is over. There's no way. That boss is mathematically impossible at that point. And then it's, you're walking for so long as well. Now, this dungeon was most improved by far by Season 3. By Season 3, they nerfed Hakar like 7 times. It was much better. And you also could take Woe to get between the different parts of the dungeon much more quickly. You could skip some of the packs more easily. But this also, like, you remember the trash into the Mechagon wing of that dungeon. It was actually pretty hard to skip that effectively. Like if you were in a pug, that stuff, that skip was not going to work out. You were going to be fighting those enemies, whether you wanted to or not. So this was a dungeon where you could go way over count. If you were in a coordinated group, you could skip stuff in both the Hakar and the Mechagon wings, and then you could do a big fun pull in the Ardenwold area. That was fun. But if you were pugging, you couldn't do that because all that stuff was getting pulled. You had all these annoying trash mobs. You had these whirlwinding things in the Hakar area. Pre-nerf Hakar again. That boss, it did get nerfed over time, but I think it took a little bit too long for them to nerf it enough. Particularly, I think Pride was covering up how hard that boss was, and you were killing it with Prides, and it was doable. But this was also, again, this was one of those dungeons where failing to do the route to spawn the Prides in the exact right spots was extremely punishing, and that was... A lot of that was Prideful's fault, but this dungeon exacerbated it for sure. So
Dude, this is sounding a lot like fuck Prideful.
yeah,
I
I mean,
agree.
a lot of this is Prideful's fault, but I think this was the dungeon that did the most, where Prideful did the most damage.
I would agree. I mean, I also really wanted to put DOS on the list, but there were definitely fun moments,
Dude.
which kept me from putting on the list. I mean, it was like a 43-minute long dungeon, right? It was a 43-minute long
Dorky,
dungeon.
how
There were
long?
so many
How
bad-
long was your list before you trimmed it down to a top 10?
Like 15, maybe a little more.
Wait, that's the same as mine. It sounds like it was like fucking every single one of them.
I mean, I just, it's just hard to decide between them, like between like 10, like anywhere from like 5 to like 15, we're all like, in the relative same-ish range,
Dude,
in my opinion, at least.
I think it's fascinating that you said like, oh, well, I'm talking about it only in season 1. I also have some dungeons on my list where it's like I only did them this season and not this season, so that's my opinion of them, and I'm glad you did it that way. Because like, but you mentioned like season 3 made it a lot better. Encrypted would have made so many bad dungeons like 100 times better too. So it's like super unfair to do the other side. Like I mean,
you can't separate the affixes from the dungeons. I don't think it's.
oh,
all
I did
part
the
of
same. Yeah, I did
ecosystem.
the same thing as you. It's like I'm just saying it's like seems like unfair to those dungeons, but I did the same.
I
thing.
also feel like it's part of because like Shadowlands was just so dog shit. Because like especially season 1, tank meta was so bad. Because like tanks were so fucking. I'm pretty sure that was the weakest tanks have ever been in all of M+. You had to kite nonstop. You were getting absolutely fucking destroyed by every singular trash pack. It was miserable. I don't think that was ever. It was just an awful season for tanks in general, and I think that definitely sours some of these dungeons.
I only did one, like really kind of two, but one. I did one season where you actually had the Shadowlands dungeons in it in Shadowland, which was season 3. And again, Encrypted maybe added a lot of that, but I loved this dungeon and pretty much every Dragonflight dungeon during that season, maybe because of the seasonal. So I omitted a few of them because of that.
Yeah, and it's worth noting, it's not just Prideful's fault. Like, this dungeon was bad, not just with Prideful, but without Encrypted. Like, Encrypted was necessary for this dungeon to be good, I think, because otherwise you were literally walking
Yeah, it was just
for 5
so
minutes
big.
per run.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I was
They should
wondering.
just deleted Mechagon.
Yeah, like I was wondering how many other dungeons would be significantly changed by having the Woe Drifter, and I was thinking immediately like Junkyard or basically just any massive dungeon would be great. All right, any other side takes?
Yeah, I mean, I want to add on like how unintuitive a lot of the mechanics were, and how season 1 was like probably really, really miserable if you were trying to pug. Like basically, every single boss had like very important things that you needed to be doing, whether it was saving damage for like the shields, whether it was like stunning. Like if you got the stun on the second boss, the gnomes or whatever, and you like feigned it or you like didn't put it on the boss, it just wiped your party. Same with the one where you have to like bounce around the debuff or whatever. Like if you're just ooking on the boss and in melee, it just will kill the same 2 people. The last boss with like knowing all the portals and like that was probably insanely
that was
miserable for
cringe.
pugs. That boss took so long. Also about the tank meta, like the funny thing was that hallway in between Hikar and the middle, like you'd have these mobs that were like, they were like casters, right? They were like witch doctors or something, but they would just melee for like half of the tank's health and they were unCCable, and the tank would just be jumping around on a Vengeance Demon Hunter running from one caster mob because it just does half of their health, and it just like, there were so many really unintuitive things that just like wiped your group for no reason if you didn't like know a lot about the dungeon. And it did slowly get fixed over the expansion, but yeah, if you only played Shadowlands for season 1, I bet you really hated that dungeon.
That's gonna be a theme on my list later. I think there's gonna be one on my list that is not on any of yours, and it's really high, and it's only because I did it in exactly one season. All right, Dorky, what's your 8?
One of the tides.
Oh wow,
Ooh, wow.
really? That's a big surprise to me, actually.
I don't know how I feel about Throne of the Tides. So does nobody else have it higher?
Doesn't sound like it. No, I go ahead.
Yeah, I think it depends on like the circumstances. Because playing VDH here made the dungeon much better. In fact, like almost enjoyable. Because like Vengeance makes dungeons fun. Who would have thought? Like I wonder why. But if you played that dungeon without a Vengeance DH, it was fucking awful, man. Like it is the prime example of everything that's wrong with M+. Every fucking trash pack just has mobs that chain cast, and if you don't somehow stop these bolts from going off or the heals going off, it was just GG for your team. And you would have to pull extremely small. There were these little dogs that would just fuck everyone up, applying bleeds. A Ravager was like super annoying to play against. There was the healing debuff mob, the Sentinels, that basically healed checked your team, and it was awful whenever someone died to the drowning debuff. The first 2 bosses were alright, and then you got to like the bottom area where they made some of the worst mobs in the game. The what do you even call them? The tentacle dudes that would suck you in. It was so obnoxious, especially as a range, because I played Boomkin a lot during the season. That was awful. The totem boss was awful. Who even made that boss? Like constant one shots, and your dispel would not be able to catch up in time, where you just had to sit flame shock debuffs. The entire gauntlet was also miserable. That was like one of the worst. And last boss was also pretty dumb. I mean, there's nothing really much to say about it. Overall, I thought that dungeon was pretty damn bad. And in fact, it was even worse in Cata Classic. Like, I played that dungeon a bit in Cata Classic, and it was even worse.
That's actually a plus side for me, because I feel like when they were bringing back Cata dungeons and they had already brought back Vortex Pinaccle, which I think will make some appearances on these lists, I was like, man, avoid Cata dungeons at all costs. And I think they made Throne of the Tides like 100 times better. And just in general, I played this a lot actually when I don't think Vengeance was meta. I was playing Havoc, and I don't know. It seemed fair. The only real detractor I have to Throne of the Tides, I don't have this on my best dungeons list. It would have resided somewhere in the middle, where there is a lot that would not exist in a top or a low 10 or a high 10. The first boss, how you have to be positioned for that lightning mechanic is like irredeemably bad.
Yeah.
That insane. Like how, and still I think, even when I played closer to the end of the season, still people did not quite understand how that worked, because why would they? There's like no real good information on how, unless you like looked it up. But that just like killed the shit out of you, and I think the design of that could not possibly have been worse. But yeah, I don't know. In general, I think I kind of liked Throne. Like everything after the first boss in Throne, I really liked.
Yeah, it was fun with VDH. That's about it. That's like the
I
only.
mean, let's be honest. We all played with. You don't play dungeons without a VDH.
Oh no, I've played with prop.
I forget? I played season 3 a lot on Havoc. I don't think I played a lot with VDH. Maybe it was Paladin, but you played a lot of VDH that season too.
People played Paladin at the start of the season a reasonable amount, yeah.
But to be fair, Paladin is like the other tank that has
a ton of interrupts.
Yeah. I mean, it was still pretty bad here, but like, yeah, it would have been even worse if you were playing with anything else.
Like a bear, yeah.
Any other Throne takes? Alrighty.
What the hell? Nothing about Throne?
I mean, I think you pretty much said it all. I don't think it was that bad that it made it on my list. Like, I feel like there's not very many, like, it's very hard to name good things about the dungeon, but I also just think there weren't too many things that I'm just like, was so miserable for me. But I guess maybe because I played mostly like a mobile healer that could do stuff, so like the weird like line of sight stuff and like the grips and stuff, like it didn't really bother me. Like I didn't have to worry about casts as much because I always played with Vengeance. Like nothing felt too out of line for me, but I understand why people would hate it.
Yeah. Growl, what's your number 8?
My number 8 is Theater of Pain.
Ooh, I'm surprised you have that. I have a
Same.
higher.
Oh, you have Theater higher, Dorki?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll go to my 8. Two of you are gonna hate this. This was I believe a top 3 dungeon for both Growl and Dorki. I have.
Alright, I'm AFK.
I have Sanguine Depths on my list at number 8.
I mean, you're just farming chat trying to win. How would you put Sanguine Depths here?
Yeah,
you just hate being the
has it,
least
right?
popular person in your own chat. That's crazy.
Dude,
You don't have it, right?
Dratnos, you don't have Sanguine, right?
No, I don't.
All right, what do you have to say, Max, buddy?
All right, so I understand
this dungeon was too hard.
I understand I'm in hostile territory here. I did not do Sanguine Depths any more than 4 times, and during those 4 times, I was not in a group that was optimizing any of the actual things on the ground you're supposed to do, or you would wipe shortly afterwards. Didn't play this in a good group, didn't play this in the MDI. It was the one I avoided the most in that season because all I ever had in there were bad times. That's it. That's my experience. I don't think the bosses were good. I don't think actually the last boss was like interesting and kind of cool. But I didn't really like the third boss. Second boss was like super basic. And first boss was fine, but yeah, just didn't enjoy my time in Sanguine Depths.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that was a pretty common experience for much of the player base in that dungeon. It escaped my list because I think there is a lot of merit to dungeons that are fun for really enfranchised people, but definitely those were the problem. Like, this would probably be in my bottom, I don't know, 20, 25, something like that.
Holy, that's a lot.
I mean, even you guys who put it at the top of your list, you guys were... Dude, you're an insane bigger hater than me. I like... You said that, like, doing the MDI, like, also vastly changed your opinion of this as well, and I didn't have anything like that. Only experienced what I think probably a lot of people experienced, not doing super high keys in a season and having Sanguine Depths as a choice. I believe Dratnos also said in our previous Best Dungeons podcast, when this got, or whatever video or talk we did, is that people, if he suggested Sanguine Depths as the key that they would do with a list of keys to do, they would kill him with hammers, right? Which would kind of signify that this maybe is not the best dungeon.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're like entirely right about like how Sanguine Depths just, you know, absolutely skill checked some players, and it was definitely a hard one. So I don't fault you for that, but yeah, it definitely, I can see why people wouldn't like it, and I remember saying that last week too.
Yeah, everyone who doesn't like Sanguine Depths is just bad. That's what it is.
No, you know, like it's completely understandable.
Growl, any thoughts? Same thing.
You know, I respect your opinion, even though it's wrong.
All right, based. All right, we are going to Dratties 7.
I have selected Halls of Infusion, again with the caveat that this is the Season 2 version. I think they moved this out of the bottom 10.
I have Halls
with
of
the
Infusion
changes
higher.
This season. Okay.
I have it higher as well.
Nice work.
Holy.
One second, let me put it on there before Dorki goes. All right, Dorki 7.
Beater of Pain, so it should be the highest, right?
No one else said they had it, and it's slightly higher than Growl's. I'm interested to hear this because this is another one that I didn't do a lot, and I actually did enjoy it, and I thought it was a really unique dungeon design. But what about this made your hate list?
I think it was just very oppressive. It was like super linear, where you were kind of just like doing the same shit the entire time. The only difference was like, all right, you can maybe like do this wing before you do the other wing, but it's not like you could do part of a wing and then go back to the other wing. So you were just doing the same shit every time, and there were just so many bad parts about it. Like the bosses kind of stinked. The trash was extremely stinky. You were pulling 1 to 3 mobs at all times. Let's see what else is there. I don't know. I mean, like just like requirement of, I think it was a disease dispel. I also like Kulfarok was so much harder depending on if you had an extra magic dispel or not. I think all of that combined just made it a pretty miserable experience. I'm surprised Growl has it on this list too, because like
you can
this
hand
would,
this
would
one
be a
off
little bit
to
more
me.
favorable for.
I liked it at first. I liked the layout a little bit, and I liked the fact that it was a high healing dungeon. The more I think about it, though, the more I just dislike it. I would say some of the main problems were the mini bosses that were random, and you would literally have to walk up to the mini boss and then see which one you got, and some of them were just like, oh, I can't pull this anymore, like, oh, now I gotta change my route. I think the PvP boss was like funny for the first 1 minute of your first time doing it, and then it just became the dumbest boss of all time, where it was basically just one shot the boss, and the entire, or rather, like, you know, all the boss does is just jump and then stomp and do your entire health bar, and you just have to have a defensive for every one, and that's like the whole boss. People didn't even kill the totems or anything. You just literally only just sat and attacked the boss. When you got to do the PvP thing, obviously you don't, like, it's counterintuitive, so just one person just automatically forfeits or whatever. Like, I don't know, that was really bad. Like you mentioned, all the trash pulls were really, really small. You're pulling like 3 mobs at a time. Every single mob is either like a mini boss or a caster or whatever. I do like the fact that I actually kind of like the aesthetic of the beginning area where you're like fighting in like this huge coliseum. I thought that was kind of cool. I also like the layout of the sense that it was linear, but like you could kind of decide, oh, we got cooldowns up, let's go to the disease wing to do a big pull, or like, oh, you know, let's go this way, and then like it loops back around. There wasn't really a lot of big like run backs or whatever, but I think there was just way too many pain points and like dumb bosses or dumb trash packs to make it an enjoyable dungeon.
It was also just so overwhelming with the amount of mechanics from trash.
Yeah. The archers that would like put the bleed on you, the ghosts that would like chain you, every single caster in the teleporter area.
If any
like,
kicks went off, it was GG.
The disease that would like in the ghoul area, like the A-bombs that you could basically like never pull in high keys.
Yeah, I'm reminded of Uldaman with this one as well, where it's like the dungeon also just felt really like a slog. I think that's just a very big risk anytime there's a 5-boss dungeon, but
yeah,
definitely that would happen in runs of this one where you're just like, man, I'm 20 minutes in and I'm like not halfway done yet. I'm over it.
What'd you guys think
It
about?
felt like a worse Uldaman.
What'd you think about the gore chop hook mechanic?
I like that.
I thought that was
I thought
sick.
that was fun. Yeah.
Yeah, it was alright. It was interesting.
What was like?
Just the whole fight I thought was a pretty good.
I thought the
not
fight
super
was
overloading mechanics, but they, you know, you did have to kind of think about your movement and.
Yeah, I thought that fight
planned
was
out.
okay.
It was mostly the trash that was like completely awful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dude, Growl, I'm watching you play a shaman in a playthrough of Theater Pain on my stream right now, just to give it context and some visuals to what we're talking about. When was the last time shaman was what you played at Mythic Plus?
It actually
Season
got
1,
giga buffed
actually.
at the beginning of Season 1 Dragonflight.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I actually
Temple of Jade
finished-
Serpent MDI.
I finished Season 1 with Pete being my highest IO character.
Let's go, Pete.
Yeah, Shaman was actually quite good.
That was actually like a really good version of Shaman, I think, too. Like, Chain Heal was really good. You use Healing Rain a lot. Like, it felt very shaman-y. I actually think that's still the case. It's just a bit undertuned right now.
I think this is, again, I didn't do this dungeon a lot. This was definitely one of the ones in Shadowlands that I didn't do as much. It just wasn't one you would do for loot. But I think this is one of the coolest like aesthetics for what they were trying to do with this zone. Like, I feel like Shadowlands was weird because every single zone was like really thematic and fucking awesome, except for Maldraxxus. But Maldraxxus was just like, they've kind of done that theme before, you know? And like both of the Maldraxxus dungeons, they did get that theme right. It was just like, I think like a way less liked theme than the other 3 dungeons. Like, I think that's something Shadowlands just did well in general, is how really in those zones those dungeons feel and how unique those zones felt. And I felt like they did that really well here. Like the whole Theater of Pain, like there's a reason you're in here. The fucking, like you're in that like pit at the beginning with all the like guys watching you challenge these bosses. Just from an outside perspective, I thought it was really cool. And it was also a fun MDI dungeon to watch too. Don't really know why. I just think every time
There was cool
I did
stuff in
like
there.
the beginning area.
There was the
Yeah, there was some cool stuff.
there was the Pandaren fall damage reduction skip. There was the Dorki. It was your group, right? The Arms Warrior tech. Yeah.
We played that against Echo.
There's cool stuff in there.
There's also,
They
it was also like the whole pull the entire gauntlet onto whatever his face.
Yeah.
How do you guys
PvP
feel?
guy, his axe.
There was really insane mini bosses in here. How do you guys feel about mini bosses in dungeons?
I hate mini bosses. I mean, like, mini bosses just feel like shittier versions of bosses. They always have like, you know, 1 or 2 mechanics and they're just a drag. It feels like, why not just make a boss instead of having a mini boss? If you're gonna have a mini boss, make it at least like somewhat interesting. I don't know. They've almost never been interesting.
My
Like when I think
tinfoil
of mini
hat about-
bosses, I
sorry,
think
go
of.
ahead.
I was gonna say, like, when I think of mini bosses, I think of like the tornado guy in Algafar Academy.
Yeah, that guy's
I
awful.
think about Shadow of Zool. I don't know. Have there ever been any good mini bosses? Like the mini boss in Core of Stars 2 is just some guy who spams Shadow Bolt volley.
Well, I think it's definitely this could be universal, but I think it's potentially a high versus low key or mid key take too, because I think mini bosses are certainly relatively much more oppressive in higher keys because it's just like a time where you're fighting a single guy that's not quite a boss, but it's like it just feels like a waste, you know, where it kind of just dies
Yeah, it's
pretty,
like
or
you
you can
can't
pull
really
with other
pull it
things.
with trash usually. So it's like you're just fighting a boss, but a much shittier version. Like if you were able to pull mini bosses with like a bunch of trash and it was just like something you can deal with, then I think that's fine. But that's rarely the case.
Yeah, true. Someone in chat said it kind of speaks for itself that you skip mini bosses any chance you can. True. And the only time that you don't skip it is when they give it an appropriate amount of count to like make that make sense. But it's like even
Or
when
if
you
it was
do that,
required.
yeah, or if it was required. But even when
And
that's
that's
the
the worst.
case, it still feels bad. You'd actually rather it not be good for count or not required, so you could just skip it. That's a good point.
Oh, you're watching my Theater of Pain guide. I actually
am.
Frank did those. Shout out to Frank.
Oh, yep.
I
Shout out,
was like
Frank.
completely swamped
shout
at the
him out.
beginning of that expansion.
shit.
Dragonflight
And,
goes, don't shout him out.
Come
Don't
on.
shout him out. All right,
Dude,
never mind.
So they have this long-standing beef. In our last podcast, Dratnos was doing this bit. We both like to do this bit where we're like, dude, Frank loves doing work. He's gonna add some gameplay
Yeah.
here, and he added gameplay of Dratnos like falling off a cliff.
Yep, I
instead
saw
of
it.
what he
Yeah,
did.
it was so good.
It went pretty hard.
Yeah.
All right,
You got
Growl.
me pretty good there.
Growl, what's your
shout out
7
to
here?
you.
My 7, sorry, I have to open up, is, I think I will be beaten here, is Vortex Pinnacle.
I have it higher.
I have it
Kinda
higher.
Wow, that's a universal. I think this one's going to be a potential point winner. So if people in the stream have been asking, because it doesn't show all of it, there is a rank on the right that like it just gives points for things ranking, obviously scaling as the higher ranking goes. Vortex Pinnacle is my early guess for, it's like one of 2 dungeons that could be there, and I think Vortex is one of them. Okay, my multiple people have Vortex higher. My 7 is Shadowmoon Burial Grounds.
I have it out here.
I have it higher.
Dratnos, what is your 6?
Siege of Boralus.
I have it
I have it
higher.
out here.
I have it higher.
Oh
Okay,
wow,
that's my pick.
we're getting
That's
some
one of
we're,
my
we're,
picks.
we're getting some bangers here. This is we're getting into the see, we all mentioned that like 6 through 10 was hard. For me 1 through 5 was not super hard. Dorki, what's your 6?
The whole ass DoTI.
Oh,
Oh,
I
You wanna just pick Rise?
I separated.
I would pick Rise, but man, like
Absolutely
it's the
fire.
worst
Well, no,
mega dungeon.
okay,
to
we
ever
are
exist.
we are going to split them. So you do have to pick one if you are going to put.
Fine, I will pick Rise, but the whole ass DoTI was.
So even if Rise wasn't an option, you would actually put Fall at 5 or 6. Sorry, whatever it is. Wait, actually, wait.
It's a package deal, right? But yeah, I'll just put Rise.
Well, this is actually really interesting. Before you mention that, I remember people saying they thought Dawn of the Infinite was fucking awesome before it ever
Really?
became a mythic.
When?
Before it ever became a Mythic Plus dungeon, like purely based on doing the mega dungeon as a mega dungeon, and just you're in there for that experience.
Nah, man. It's the
hard
weakest
mode
mega dungeon by far.
And then like once
I
it
think every other
became
one.
Mythic Plus, the opinion. This is just someone who I literally did not do DoTI. This was purely based on like what I thought my chat's perception and my guildie's perception was, and then it got a lot worse once it became Mythic Plus dungeons.
Yeah, I mean every other mega dungeon was significantly better. It was the worst one by far.
Is that actually? So go ahead and defend that take. I'm actually gonna make that a poll in my chat. I'm interested to hear what their thought is about that.
Okay, so I mean, like, let's talk about Rise specifically. You literally pulled the same mobs the entire dungeon. There was like, no way around it. You had to fight the exact same stuff. It was super linear. There was way too much RP. The bosses were not particularly fun. I don't know. There's like nothing to really say about it. I mean, like maybe 6 is a little bit too much. Like maybe we could have swapped it with like Court of Stars or something, or Feet of Pain, whatever. But it was just not an enjoyable dungeon. Like I think the only thing I enjoyed about Rise was the very beginning, where you just pulled like a bunch of mini bosses with a bunch of trash, which was like the only time I would actually enjoy mini bosses. But aside from that, like there was nothing good about the dungeon. And also, I think what was really terrible about the last boss in particular is when they do high damage plus movement at the same time. It's been such a common theme in Dragonflight, I feel like, where they make a group take infinite fucking damage while having massive movement. Like, how the fuck is your healer supposed to keep you alive during that? And whenever I played Boomkin, I felt like I was in perma-death. I was just perma-bear form, running around for my fucking life.
I should have mentioned this. Oh shit, I'm muted.
Yeah, not a lot to say about it.
I should have mentioned this. I actually do have Rise on my list, but it is also 6, so it's like totally fine that we're talking about it now. But I agree with everything you're saying, other than I want to point out I did do a quick poll in my chat about like what's the worst mega dungeon ever, not including Mythic Plus, just the mega dungeon itself, and DoTI won by a fucking huge margin, and I would have never guessed that until hearing that
what
before.
would Jeff pick though? Like it's the 100% not Tazavash, and then like
Yeah,
it can't
no,
be Tazavash.
it
It can't be
there's no
Karazhan.
way
It could be
it's
Mechagon,
Karazhan.
maybe.
It could be
but,
maybe,
like,
yeah. I mean, Mechagon was second.
Like I think Dawn of the Infinite was probably the worst of the mega dungeons in not M+, but I think they were all good.
Yeah, I mean, I remember
playing
the
casually.
when DoTI came out, the reception was majorly positive.
Yeah.
Was my thing, but I guess you're right that's always been true, and it's kind of like considering them against.
I mean, all
each
the
other.
mega dungeons own for like M0
Yeah, that's
and hard mode.
dude. I'm just
gameplay,
really
yeah.
surprised to see that number. Like just purely based on not Mythic Plus, which is what I said in the poll. Like you would have when this came out, you would have never imagined that people actually said it was the worst by that much.
I mean, just because you say don't let M+ factor into your decision as well doesn't mean people are doing that as well.
Yeah, that might be it. Oh, but either way,
Hold up.
Yeah, I don't know. I thought it was lame as a mega dungeon too. Like without.
Fair enough.
I think Rise.
I mean, yeah,
actually
the other
is
ones were so
good.
strong as well.
I remember people saying like in season 4 when you could do DoTI on Mythic 0 and do it hard mode for good gear, that people were like also really enjoying that too. But maybe that was more of like the gear was really cool and that concept was cool, and less about the dungeon actually being good. I also, when I was doing Rise in that season, the only season I did Mythic Plus this expansion, Rise was in it. The RP is obviously bad. Shoutout, there was one interesting MDI thing when like you guys did the little engineering tinker and like fucking zoomed across that platform. That was fucking sick. But I also just feel like multiple rooms just didn't feel like they were made very well. Like I actually think that room after, what's the first boss called? The Odin looking guy? Or just after you do the maze. That whole sand room, I think that is without question the singular worst room that has ever been in a Mythic Plus dungeon. It's just fucking awful. Like it's like,
Dude, I didn't know that room
here?
was the same one as the one in Fall. It actually blew my mind.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I was in the
whole
dungeon.
like teleports and portals mechanic though is like, what did they expect us to do with that? Except for, and then somehow Echo and people in that MDI found a way to actually like snap them around. But I don't know, those the Rift Mages ports, the only way that you could make them actually do anything was with snapping.
Yeah. Any other Rise?
Yeah, I think this dungeon is getting completely unnecessary hate. I think the first area is really, really cool in the sense that you're pulling big. It's very straightforward. You kick the volleys, the mobs have frontals, the bleed on the tank, and you can choose what mini bosses you want. You can choose, like, am I just going to pull one at a time and focus it? Am I going to try and do two? There's always, like, a banger lust pull. You can do, like, pretty big pulls and pull it a lot of different ways. I think every single boss in that dungeon is extremely fair and not one-shotty at all, and that's a massive problem with basically, like, so many bosses in Dragonflight right now. I think the mini game is probably one of the most fun and like well designed like mini game weird puzzly things. Like personally, I'm not a fan of those, but the fact that like as long as a couple people get through and they can just open the portal and let everyone else through means like, you know, you're not getting griefed by one or two mouth breathers in your party. I think the
love
sand
that part of the
area.
dungeon.
I think the sand area, while it's not great, I kind of like the idea of, like, there's a lot of, like, little dumb mobs just, like, kind of running in and you're just, like, doing lots of AoE, even though there's only, like, a few mobs. Like, it makes, like, a mini-boss, like, small mob density area into, like, you're pulling bigger. I think the RP and the running around is really bad, and I think that's what to me makes the dungeon from like possibly good dungeon to a mid dungeon. But I think in general Rise is like what besides the RP, what dungeons should shoot for in terms of high M plus. Like it's about how do you optimize your pulls and how do you like it's like a damage race and like a time race rather than just living bullshit bosses and one-shotty stuff. And like I feel like the mechanic density in Rise feels good. Like it feels like there's enough to keep you busy and care about, but you don't really
it's only
feel
because
like
you're pulling two mobs at a
cognitively-
time.
I mean, you don't pull two mobs at a time at the first area. You don't pull two mobs at a time in the sand area. Like,
But, the sand area, bro. The sand area is literally just one mob at a time. Like what? Those
yeah,
aren't
but there's
even
like a
real
lot of little
mobs,
shitter
it's
mobs
just
you're just
shitters.
blasting, right? Like
Oh,
that's exactly how it
those
should
feel
be.
terrible.
Like there's
Shitter mobs
there's
do
like
not
one or
ever
two
feel
mobs that
good.
do stuff, and then there's a bunch of like little dumb mobs that you're just AoEing.
Nah, the shitter mobs are the worst.
Yo, I think-
the more you say it, the more miserable it sounds. Like nobody likes hitting them. Like there's no point in ever dotting them because they just die instantly. The tank is always trying to figure out how to grab aggro on these guys because they just keep swarming in, and then they just like randomly melee people and one shot them, or they do their double strike or whatever. That area is fake.
I thought the first boss was awesome. I think like when you do the first boss properly, I think the first boss is really cool. Everything about it.
Yeah, I agree with that. The first boss was cool.
And
Yeah,
then
I think this dungeon's extremely mid, but I feel like to put it like you're literally putting it at the same place that Dratnos has Siege of Boralus. Like I feel
Well,
like
yeah,
this
I mean,
dungeon
but
does not-
Dratnos has Siege of
Arguably, I have
Boralus
Siege of Boralus too
way
high. Yeah.
too
This
high.
is
Well, I mean, like
this
I
is
said,
look. I mean, okay, I'm gonna
but,
go
like,
through
everything from,
everybody's
like,
list.
5
This
to,
is
like, 15 are all
alongside
shit.
Shadowmoon Burial Grounds, Vortex Pinnacle, Halls of Infusion, Siege of Boralus. Like, really, this dungeon is I don't know.
Okay,
I feel
but
like this
really, you guys
doesn't fit
put
here.
Vortex and Siege and Shadowmoon Burial Ground that low?
Yeah,
Or
we have
high?
some low entries here for those.
Look, there's a lot of options for
What
this
is gonna
part
be
of the
worse
list.
than those?
There are some stinkers over the years, as you've said.
Yeah.
I can't believe people are spamming growl L. Like, bro, like
Well, he's growl. Right?
That's a good bit.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's
Okay. Growl, what is your 6?
my 6 is Shadowmoon Burial Grounds.
a bit higher.
Dorky has it higher. Let me put that there. My 6 was Rise. I just forgot to stop him when he started talking about it. Dratnos, what is your 5? We're in the top 5 now.
Tol Dagor.
I have it higher.
Yeah, Max is definitely just farming community takes.
Okay. All right, Dorky, what's your 5?
Siege of Boralus.
I have it higher.
I have it higher. Where are we at? Growl, what is your 5?
My 5 is King's Rest.
Oh,
I
I
have it
was
higher.
so interested to see if someone put this on their list. Okay. So Dratnos has that higher. Okay. My 5 is Spires of Ascension.
I have it higher.
Higher.
All right. We have Dratnos's 4.
Vortex Pinnacle.
I have it higher.
Higher.
This is a banger.
Wow, we are on a big streak here.
We
This
are
is
on a big
good.
streak. Yeah. Dorky, what's your 4?
Nokhud Offensive. I'm pretty sure that's the highest, right?
Yeah, it is. I had it at 9. Take it away.
I don't know if it's because of recency bias, but Nokhud is like the most boring dungeon. Like, Jesus Christ. Actually, it's not the most boring dungeon, but it is like the most boring dungeon of this season. And it's just because like it's the longest dungeon this season by quite a bit. Also makes it pretty bad. I don't know. Like, I didn't like this when they brought it back. And then I played this dungeon a bunch as a healer, and it was even more boring. There is very little good about Nokhud. But I guess, like, you know, now that I think about it, maybe I wouldn't put it as 4 just because there are some dungeons that might be worse. But recency bias, it was definitely a stinker. You're just doing the same shit every single time. You're forced to fight these packs that don't really do a whole lot, or it's completely miserable if you're not using the pole because the war spears are just charging out and killing people with the bleeds. The first boss is kind of lame. I thought second boss was cool, but that's really about it. Third boss is vastly overtuned. The Gale arrows just one shot even at like a 15 key, it's actually disgusting. Last night I was pugging this key. I was playing with fucking hunters with Sark Cloak. There wasn't even an augmentation evoker
that's
with
so
a Sark
good.
Cloak. Like, why are you guys using Sark Cloak, man? It's so fucking annoying.
That's
I'm just doing a
insane. Didn't
15 key and
people-
people are getting one shot by
Didn't-
Gale Arrow? Like, what is this?
Wasn't it well known in like season 2 that like Sark Cloak is like an objectively bad
Well, because
decision if
people
you
on-
care
people
about
put
the
on BIS
content you're
list
doing?
or some shit. That's why.
My class Discord actually says it's bit.
Like
Actually, on Wildhead, I'm pretty sure
that
it's
is
on
an
my BIS list.
that is an insane impression, Dratnos. But yeah, I feel like it's just obvious. Like I think if people knew how much percentage health you lost, and it wasn't just like, oh well, you lose some stamina.
And you don't even gain much damage, really. They gain like fucking nothing.
I
Dude,
also-
I was
Let's go ahead, Dorky. Sorry.
I was playing with a hunter that had 2% versatility and Sark Cloak. A fucking hunter, man. And I was healing that key, by the way.
I feel like if you in your Wowhead guide put the Sark Cloak on your BIS list and you don't like at least put a disclaimer that like it's probably a bad idea. It's just for like I think the Sark Cloak is fine for content you've done before and you don't care if you like wiped it or something. But if you're doing progression content like a boss you haven't killed before, or even you care about your guild's farm, or like you're doing a progression key and you're using that, like you just
But it's like, why, though?
yeah, you're not making it you're making it harder for your group to time that content. The trade-off for the damage you get versus how much health you lose is a hilariously bad trade-off. It's just for pure greed. That's insane. I didn't know people were doing that. It was even in season 2, people weren't doing it. Like it was like known
Well, I
that
mean,
it was
because
just a
they
bad.
Catalyzed
right?
your Sark
Like,
Cloak if you
well, I mean-
were a good boy, yeah.
Yeah.
But also, like, how the hell were we going to get a Sark Cloak back in season 2, right? Because, like, now there's Booleons, and now people can easily get it. But before, you actually had to, like, kill Sark
Yeah, you had to-
get a very rare cloak, which was, like, extremely hard to get.
If you were capable of killing Mythic Sarkaroth as well, you probably were more likely to be able to understand that you wanted an extra 100,000 health.
Oh, true. Now you don't have to do. Oh,
Yeah.
that makes way. That's really smart, actually. I think that's what it is. Sorry, I kind of cut you off in the middle of that. What, do you have any more? I picked it as well. I have some takes, but do you have any more, Dorky?
You can go. You can go.
Well, okay, so I think there were a lot of good things about this dungeon, and there's 2 like really, really bad things. So I think actually I don't have really an issue with many of the bosses. I don't think I did Nokhud on a high enough key where like the 3rd boss just made me hate my life. I never really disliked it. I kind of like 2 target bosses. I think this boss that we're looking at right now, 2nd boss, it's actually like one of the better dungeon bosses they've made. The 1st boss in its simplicity is also fine. And I think the last boss alone was fine. I don't know if you can still do the rock stuff. I haven't played it this season, but I think this dungeon fails miserably in a couple of places. Number 1, the fact that you were never actually able to get or do any of the trash at the end of the dungeon. Like it just either never gave count or it was never realistic to choose, I think was a problem. In a dungeon that should have this much decision making, you can go to like different bosses in different orders or different areas. There actually really isn't any because of the way the mob count works. You like fly into a zone, which by the way, I don't think dragon riding was a negative part of this dungeon whatsoever. But what they did because of dragon riding was they like highlighted a few mob packs you had to kill. And I think that was terrible. Like the fact that to spawn any of these bosses, there was like 5 packs that had to die. That just is objectively bad. If they were just remove that, this dungeon is more interesting. You have much more choice in the amount of things you pull or what you pull, or if you can do the boss first or later. It just doesn't make sense that you would have to do that. And unfortunately, I think there's a dungeon this expansion that has a similar vibe to that, the one in Hallowfall. So like that was a huge negative, and yeah, that's basically it. I just think like the marked mobs, like you're seeing on the screen right now, like on your map, oh, you have to kill these packs. I just think that stinks. I don't know why that's in the game.
Yeah, also, these packs, even though it's just 5 mobs, is overloaded with shit that you need to deal with. Like,
Yeah.
oh, if a bolt goes off, you die. If a tempest goes off, you die. If you don't dispel the shield, you die. There's just like so many things happening with so little mobs, and I think that it's like such a Dragonflight problem where they overload the amount of mechanics on just a couple of mobs.
Also, the end of the dungeon, like they were like people were flying in or whatever, and they were like, "Oh, we don't want you doing that." We're like walking up around the side, but then they nerfed that a couple times. Then they just kind of gave up on stopping us from going up this.
Oh yeah, imagine if you had to go up
cliff.
the normal way.
Yeah, which like obviously that would suck, but like it's so weird and counterintuitive that the way you're supposed to do this dungeon is like everybody's supposed to fly to a very specific point on the mountain where you can abuse the fact that they don't have good coverage on their anti-air cannons.
I'm surprised this wasn't on
so
more of your
strange.
all's list. So I guess like Growl and Dratnos, was this close, or was this? Do you guys enjoy this dungeon?
For me personally, like Raging Tempest is just a pretty fun fight. I don't know, the trash. I guess it's most of the rest of the trash. I wholeheartedly agree with your assessment that like it's a huge shame that you have required trash to spawn each of the bosses. Like this dungeon would be so improved by letting you kill whatever trash you wanted in each of those areas. But I don't know. I don't find myself having the opposite of fun in this dungeon all that often. I agree as well on Tira and Maruk being overtuned on the Gale arrow too, but I think it probably doesn't make my bottom like 20, maybe bottom 30.
Yeah, it's definitely a recency bias for me because like there probably are worse dungeons, but this dungeon is just so boring to play.
I think they messed up you guys keep talking about the mechanic with the arrows on the like bosses being overtuned. I actually think that's an even bigger failure than you're making it out to be, because the point of that mechanic, you could nerf that by 20% immediately, because what's supposed to be challenging about the mechanic is actually the tornadoes, right? It's 5 people spreading out, not getting hit by a barrage of tornadoes. It already has difficulty, so to make the difficulty at any point be the upfront scaling of the initial hit is insane. Like, why is that hard?
You're immune to the tornadoes of your buddies, so you just stack all 4
yeah,
of them
it's
in the
just
same
like,
spot. Like
you can tell that
Yeah.
they just didn't really consider that, and the fact that you
Yeah,
didn't
if you're
consider it and
stacked,
then
you clear
fix
thundering
it.
too.
yeah.
God, that's the worst, dude.
Oh, thundering.
No good, more like no good. God damn.
Excellent bit, Dorky. All right, okay, we have Growls 4. We're getting up to the top now.
My 4 is Halls of Infusion.
I have it higher. My 4 is Siege of Boralus.
I have it higher.
Dratnos' 3 is
Wait, no, never mind.
Temple of the Jade Serpent.
Oh,
interesting. All right, lay it on us.
This dungeon stinks. They griefed the hell out of this dungeon with the trash they added to the end of this place, but also the 3rd and 4th bosses were quite bad, and Wise Mari was just bugged all season and never fixed either. But okay, so the 3rd boss was one of those bosses where it's like, which combination of tank and healer have you brought to the party today? Oh, you answered like prot warrior. Oh, you stupid idiot. You have to have like 7 battle reses if you want to do this boss now. And then the last boss was like, did you come in here with a mass dispel? Did you come in here with a warlock imp dispel? No, you dumb loser. You've done 30 minutes of this dungeon, but it's time to hard out because this boss is not possible. So yeah, I was dumb. This dungeon was bad.
I want to put it higher too, but goddamn, there's just too many stinkers. So you were right, actually. I should have put Temple of Jade Serpent here. I don't know why it's
You're
not
a
here.
peak hater. Yeah, but I mean, no one here is going to defend Temple of Jade Serpent. I don't think. Like the reason.
No, okay, so I will have one thing that I will say about Temple of Jade Serpent is that it is a high intensity dungeon where shit's happening the entire time, and it is engaging. And I thought the first boss, Wise Mari, was a banger because Pete always died to that shit. I know it was funny as hell.
man.
But that's about it.
The reason why this was in my short list of things to whittle down into the top 10. I also like how Dorky only queued his mic there just to flame Growl. Like when he wasn't actually planning on giving any dungeon insight. He just wanted to point out.
Dude, Wise Mari's a banger. It's the hardest boss in the game.
Well, okay, I actually think Wise Mari. So Wise Mari used to be an ultra stinker. Like the version of that thing in Mop was 10 times worse than the version they actually gave you now. That wasn't enough to. I just think this dungeon is on the list due to pure negligence. How they didn't. This is such an obvious tuning problem with tank damage in this dungeon on the second to last boss and the trash just in general in that area and how it worked. And also the decision to add that extra trash pack near the end was just absolutely psychotic. Also the dispel thing is something where it's like clearly super restrictive. But I don't know, like I don't think the dungeon had too much going for it in general. A lot of mop dungeons I think are not actually really strong. I think they made a good decision by I think only choosing to bring back one of them so far. A lot of them I don't think will hold up well. Challenge modes kind of rose-tinted glasses people to how good the dungeons actually were in mop. But yeah, I don't know. Temple just seemed like such an oversight in tuning in the only season where they actually actively tuned dungeons. Like they changed a bunch of the other dungeons in this season a lot, and they just didn't change this one. So I don't know. It almost made my list. Probably should have maybe, but I just think this was like wasn't as bad of design as Blizzard negligence in tuning.
Pete, anything?
What I liked about the dungeon was that there wasn't like any RP. The dungeon was like fairly short, so it was painful, but you know, you got it out of the way like pretty quick. Like it didn't feel like it dragged on and it was miserable. Like it definitely had some very questionable points on it, but like to me, like the fact that it was like a 30 whatever minute dungeon versus dungeons that are like 40 plus minutes, like just made it so it was definitely not one of my favorite dungeons, but it just wasn't so bad to me that I had to put it on my list.
I also
kind of a theme, at least with some of mine. I have a lot of like longer, miserable, annoying dungeons.
Pure DPS opinion. if you did Temple of the Jade Serpent and your tank happened to not die during it, and you just DPS what was in front of you, it was a pretty enjoyable experience. That's
fair,
what made it not go on my list. And I didn't actually tank the dungeon, so I didn't realize how hellish it was, where a couple of you did. Okay, Dorki, what's your 3?
I have Vortex Pinnacle.
I also have Vortex Pinnacle at 3, so we can talk about it after, unless someone has it even higher than that. Okay?
No, we all have it on our list, but lower.
So, okay, Growl, what's your 3?
I am surprised to have not seen this one yet. My number 3 is Grimrail Depot.
Okay. Does anyone else have Grimrail on here?
Wow, I was expecting this to be on a lot of lists as well. Yeah.
Did you guys not remember this one, or you guys just blocked this one out of your memory?
Same
what
thing with that I
It was
mentioned at
just
the
very
beginning.
inoffensive, I feel like.
I really like trains. I don't know.
Yeah, it's not even about trains for me. I just
Stop spamming growl L. You guys you don't even pretend like you
Growl?
like this stuff.
yeah, no, people were actually so visibly mad at me in chat that I didn't have Grimrail Depot on my list, and it just comes down to the thing I said at the very beginning. Weird camera angles and short, close proximity affixes don't bother me. So therefore, I
mean, okay, in general, they don't affect me if there is counterplay, but there's so many times in Grimrail Depot where there was absolutely no counterplay. One of the biggest culprits was the new affix in the dungeon was Shrouded, which in most situations wasn't really a problem because, like, you could see your screen, but Shrouded would have those purple puddles and you literally couldn't even see, and your entire team would just be sleeping. Like, you would just be in some corner, no one could see their screen, and then just 4 of your team is just veg. And then also, what if it's Sanguine, the bolstering, like, every single affix in that dungeon was so miserable. And then on top of that line of sight with the boxes, you would have to, like, jump up on top of boxes, and, like, your tank moves because of Sanguine or because of Shrouded, and now you can't hit the mobs. Like, the bosses, I think the first boss was okay, but the last boss where, like, the lightning would just, like, hit random parts in the room, and the way that you played that boss was you have to stand on a pixel on, like, the very edge so that you don't get hit, and you have to stand on, like, one of the wheels of the train, and if you did it too far, you would, like, fall off. Like, I don't know, that dungeon was so bad. It goes a little bit against what I say about the dungeon being short not being so bad, because, like, that was also a very short dungeon. But, like, man, the part after the first boss with the stairs, with the mobs that do that, like, insane bleed that stacks on the tank that just kills them in, like, 3 seconds, and you're just, like, running up the stairs dodging cannonballs, like,
that's the worst part of the dungeon.
I mean, every part of the dungeon is the worst part of the dungeon.
I think that part you just mentioned is by far the worst part of the dungeon. Like, you kill the first boss, and then you, like, walk up those stairs and kill 2 mobs. I think that might be one of the worst Mythic Plus things to have ever happened. Like, that fucking sucks. You don't think that boss was good, though? The first boss? I think the first boss was so fucking fun as a DPS.
The first boss was alright. But I think the other 2 were really bad.
Yeah.
Bro, not gonna lie, I completely forgot all the things that happened in Grimrail Depot. I mean, I had this in my contender list, but, like, well, no, it's more like, you know, like, it felt very inoffensive, and I barely did the dungeon. Like, I think if I did the dungeon more, I may have disliked it more. Or, like, if it was, like, harder tuned, I would have 100% hated it more. But because it was just kind of, like, an easy-ish dungeon where, like, none of the shit that you say, like, really matters, I kind of just didn't really care too much about Grimrail.
I think
you remember the first phase of the second boss where you're in that 1-inch room and everybody, like, takes a corner.
Okay, yeah, that shit's bad. That shit's definitely bad.
Literally, like, how many things in the dungeon are just, oh yeah, that was the worst thing I've ever did.
I mean, even
like,
the second part of that.
7 of those things.
That might be the worst Mythic Plus dungeon boss, maybe. That second boss in Grimrail. Like, it's basically like an RP item fight thing that also has an awful first part of it too. Also, I think this dungeon for me also positively gained from the fact that it only existed once in Mythic Plus, and it was with a really good seasonal affix. And I think that can easily hurt or help a dungeon if it was true with a good or bad one.
Yeah, Growl, did you play TGP that season?
No.
Okay, yeah, because there was the funny thing in TGP where you couldn't do Zolgamux through the wall, but you could on live servers.
The birth of the rules.
Yep.
Yeah, that's
mandatory. It was also mandatory again that got whatchamacallit, the strike for it, right?
Wait, what did they do?
They pulled Zolgamux through the wall.
Dude, it's so stupid. Oh, okay, I'm not even preaching. Everyone here agrees with this, but, like, the MDI rule where you can't do things that people have been doing on live for months because it just randomly doesn't count as some rule is so lame. Okay, we're in finishing up our top 3 here. I have Vortex Pinnacle. Does anyone have Vortex higher than 3?
I think that this is the 4th person to put a Vortex Pinnacle on the list.
Okay. Dorky, take it away. You had it first.
So I'll say right off the bat, they made some of the worst mobs in the beginning of the dungeon. If you have the mob that spam cast bolts that you have to kick, otherwise it's like death. If the mobs that charge and apply a bleed, like a magic spell, that was also awful. And then you have the fucking shield dudes who would put up a shield and you can't hit them unless you stood behind them. And then after that, it would do like a massive swirly that would just completely deny melees and tanks. I think that like whole entire beginning section is just so anti-fun. It's like they intentionally designed that part to be miserable to play. Like it's not meant to be fun to play. That's the intention. And aside from that, like there's nothing really positive about the entire dungeon. All the bosses were kind of whatever, but trash was for the most part awful. It was super linear too. You were basically doing the same shit the entire time. I mean, there's just like nothing to really defend about Vortex.
Who has a positive Vortex take? What is something about Vortex that you guys liked? Is there?
All right, great points.
So
Alright.
what about the other two dungeons that we all have on our list that are above 3? I mean, I had it at 3 too. That are so offensive that this would not be worse than them. I considered
Yeah.
having this number 1.
This was definitely in the. I mean, all 4 of my top 4 are in my opinion, like very bad. Oh, honestly, all my top 6 all very bad.
Yep.
I don't know. I mean, at least it was only 3 bosses. At least it was over kind of quick.
Is it the worst?
Yeah, it was a short dungeon. That's a good thing.
I think okay, honestly, like the second boss wasn't the worst thing to have ever happened, ever.
I kind of liked some of those big
Feels alright.
trash pulls where you like pulled everything in like a little cubby, but you could also probably use
Oh,
that as a negative.
you had to stand somewhere where like you couldn't jump so that the assassins couldn't
Yeah.
teleport
Yo.
to you.
Yeah,
That
so
was
I'm like-
stupid.
Otherwise,
I-
it would one-shot you.
I mean,
yeah.
Yeah,
that could
that was
also
really
be a similarly negative thing, right? 'Cause
Yeah.
that's
Like, yeah,
dumb
like
as
all the
fuck.
trash was miserable. Like,
It had a good name, the Harry
not a
Potter pull.
singular good
That's pretty
trash.
sick. Is the last boss the boss
It's pretty
that
bad.
scales the worst with key level of any boss in Mythic Plus?
not the worst, but it definitely sucks.
Which one's the worst?
It has that problem that is almost always really bad whenever a boss has it, where it's just spawning ads that need to die, and they're scaling with the key
and
level.
are trying to kill you because it like
Yeah,
it's like,
so,
with,
like-
yeah,
it's like with each key level it gets harder because the ad is pulsing damage to you, which increases with key level, and the amount of time it takes to kill also increases with key level.
Yeah.
So it's like it's like each key level is like 2 key levels of difficulty added.
Yeah, very annoying.
I don't know. There are a lot of bosses that scale very poorly.
Alrighty, I'm surprised. Have we someone? That means someone has Shadowmoon Battlegrounds in our top 2, which is interesting. I think we.
Yeah, that's me.
I forget where are we at right now. Is it? It's Dratnos is
It's
2,
me,
right?
Me too. Yeah.
Okay.
King's Rest.
I was really interested to see this here. All right, and so no one else has King's Rest. So Dorky and I don't have King's Rest at all, and then Growl had it at 5. All right, make your case.
Okay, this dungeon was really, really long and stupid. There were several bosses and trash pulls that were dumb. There was lots of parts where you had just no agency on what was happening next, right? Like you go into the start of the dungeon, and you have like boss room. The one merciful part of the dungeon was you'd often wipe to the first boss, and then you would be done. But if that didn't happen, then you had to do the gauntlet next, and you're just fighting, 4 packs entirely on rails, no options on what you can do there. Then you're heading over to the Machimba's room, and Machimba is just a boss that was bugged for the entirety of the expansion, where you just had to like click on the coffin really fast, and then it just didn't do the mechanic, and that was like how you did that boss if you were serious about the dungeon, and that was really stupid. Then you had the bridge trash, which was extremely hard. There was a lot of very difficult pulls in there, but at least it was sort of okay. Like it was sort of interesting trash, I guess, and you had some options for what to do. Then you had the council fight, which was also that one. I think it was fine if you had like a demon hunter that could blade dance or something, or a brewmaster that could spin around and auto dodge. Otherwise, it was pretty tough, but also a fair boss fight, I guess. Then you had Shadow of Zul. Shadow of Zul is just there, like again, 7 key levels harder than the rest of the dungeon if you're on fortified, depending on what tank you were playing with. It was just absolutely nuclear difficulty. You could skip it if you had like a demon hunter with a seesaw toy and they went around the side and you just skip Shadow of Zul. But otherwise, you had to do this mini boss that was just absolutely turbo nuclear difficulty. I don't know. There was just a dungeon where the timer was super long. You were in there for such a long time, and there were like 7 parts that were either really hard or really on rails and boring.
Go ahead, Dorky.
I was gonna say, actually, let Growl first since he has it on 4.
Oh yeah, true.
I want to emphasize how not fair and how insanely overtuned the third boss and the bridge trash were. That shit was insane. You literally needed a demon hunter every 12 seconds to look at a mob CD and be like, okay, his bleed is up. Stand next to it, tank runs away, Demon Hunter blade dances to dodge it.
That's dog
it's
shit.
a fervent, and then the tank runs back in. Also, BFA, you didn't even play Tyrannical. These overtuned bosses that you were wiping to was on Fortified. If you would have had to play King's Rest on Tyrannical, it would have been Jover.
I mean, that's like the same as now. I feel like right now, like you're wiping two bosses off Fortify too.
Also, I want to
yeah,
add
you're
the
not wrong.
mini boss or the gauntlet after the first boss. The packs that spawn were random, and so you don't know whether it's going to be the easy 2 mob pack that you don't want to use cooldowns on, or the giant pack that's very scary that you need to lust, which is very, very stupid if you play DPS, not even knowing what the pack's going to be.
So King's Rest is interesting. Everything about it seems bad. It's linear. There's a trash room that is like in waves, and you don't have a gong to like make it go faster. The bosses are challenging. Shadow of Zul's obviously a huge pain. But when I was talking about King's Rest earlier, my chat was filled with people that are fans of King's Rest. I also remember doing that. This is I mentioned previously with BFA, like my dungeon experience is super weird. It's why I had Shrine of the Storm really highly, is because like I didn't do these keys on live. I didn't do King's Rest on live and high keys. I only did it in MDI, in which Zul wasn't like making the key impossible. This was actually a really fun MDI dungeon. Like pulling everything in the first room, which shouldn't be doable, is actually super fucking hard and really fun. The second room still sucks. Pulling everything with the embalmers is really fun. Like you pulled everything on top of that boss and did the boss while you were killing the trash, and that was fucking sick. How cool Awakened skips evolved in this dungeon, and at the end of BFA was really fun. I don't know. My time in here wasn't. I didn't do high keys or whatever. I just couldn't put it on my list because I just found myself somewhat liking it, and my chat, who I imagine is purely based on doing live keys, was also like straight up 50-50 in King's Rest. And then also within our call here, 50% of us have it extremely high on their list, and the other 2 don't have it included. So I'm interested to hear, Dorki, also what kept this off your list.
Yeah, so this was definitely a contender, but the more I thought about it, I was like, man, this dungeon really wasn't that bad. Like, yeah, it was bad at the time because, you know, BFA was a banger, but I think King's Rest, by today's standard, would actually be kind of okay because it really wasn't that overloaded with mechanics. Like, when I think about it, the trash was really tough, like everyone's been mentioning, but they only did, like, one thing at a time, and it wasn't a cognitive overload experience. In fact, like, you know, this poll you're watching right now with Shakib doing, like, all right, there's 4 mobs. They each do a mechanic, but nothing is, like, oppressive. It's not like there were 50 kicks and stops going on. I was kind of a fan of that. It was just simple but challenging. I will say, though, like, during its time, it was definitely bad because it was super linear. The whole RNG of that second area that Growl was talking about, and the whole bridge area, too, the bosses. I honestly don't mind this dungeon as much as I remembered disliking it back in BFA.
Dude, this video is so funny. It's so unintentionally funny. This video is called King's Rest Mythic Plus Tank Guide, and it's just him
And he's just
fucking
dying.
getting shit on and dying to every pull. Like, why would you?
King's Rest.
Why would you
Yeah,
upload
that
this
was
to YouTube? That's so
Some Shaq shit.
That is the most Shaq thing I've ever seen. Okay.
It's theoretical, too.
Yeah, I don't know, man. Everything about dungeons that makes me any logic I have to why a dungeon would be bad applies to this dungeon, and I didn't really dislike doing it, so I don't know. It's weird.
I want to also add that King's Rest was dramatically overtuned for basically the entire expansion, and there was, except for a short period, no key rerolling. So
Yeah.
if you ever got a King's Rest, not like that's
over,
just like
yeah.
-2 key levels. Like you
I
time
mean-
like a 25 and you're like, yeah, we get a 26 key. And then it's a King's Rest and your group is literally challenged by a 24. So it's literally like you time your key and then it goes down a level. That's what getting a King's Rest felt like.
Yeah, this dungeon's like Seed back in
You would
Legion.
go-
It's vastly overtuned.
You would on Monday do exclamation point keys in your group, and 5 King's Rest would be put in chat.
Yeah,
and they'd be
that
like,
was a
"All right."
big meme.
Yeah,
Yep.
then you were done with the week.
We can talk
Yeah.
about this after too, but no one's put it on their list yet. But I think if you were to have chat guess what dungeons are going to show up on this list, I think Seat might be the absolute highest. And it's looking like it's going to be on 0 people's list, which is not surprising to me, but it wouldn't be surprising if one person had it, I guess. But we'll talk after the list about like
Seed
notable.
was just ahead of its time.
Same, yeah. Is notable omissions here. All right, so we're moving on from King's Rest to Dorky Bears number 2.
SMBG, Shadowmoon Burial Ground.
I think
Anyone else?
everyone else has this, right? It was just lower. Wait, Dratnos, you don't have Shadowmoon?
Yeah, I did a lot of bad stuff that season, sure, but there's a lot of dungeons I had to put on this list.
That's what I'm saying, man. See, and you
It's
guys call
tough.
me
So
a hater,
Dratnos
but
is also a peak
Dranos
hater.
understands.
Love that.
Yeah.
I also
Hard
think
to
it's
put on
not
the list
surprising because
eventually.
Shadowmoon. I mean,
Dungeons
people
to
had
hate.
some hesitancy in my chat before when I talked about Shadowmoon, and they were like, "Okay, genuinely tell me what's bad about it." And I think this is the peak high key versus low key. This is the easiest loot dungeon of all time, and that is
Yeah, I mean the thing is like even on a low key though, like the problem with Shadowmoon is it is the most boring dungeon that exists. I can't think of a more boring dungeon
Bone
than
Maw,
Shadowmoon
man.
Burial Ground, and I think that part alone puts it really like it wasn't super offensive. Like I didn't find Shadowmoon Burial Ground to be like oh like it's fucking awful to play. It's more that it's so boring that I had to put it here. There were times where like I actually like start dozing off when I'm fighting Bone Maw, and I've never really felt that way ever.
Yeah.
In, like all these years of playing M+.
Yep.
Like when I'm
it's
90,
like I'm in a
looking back at
lecture.
my life, I'm not going to regret the time that I spent playing World of Warcraft because, like, I've done a lot out of this game. But I am definitely going to be thinking, like, man, I spent many hours fighting Bone Maw over the course of my life. I'd love to get those hours back.
Yeah, it's just so fucking boring. Like the entire dungeon from the beginning to the end. There's like nothing going on. The pulls are extremely small. You can't do anything different, so you're pulling the exact same shit every single time. The
I think
bosses
first
are
and last
extremely
bosses
boring.
are both pretty good. I don't know.
I mean, they were alright, but like they didn't do anything interesting. Like maybe it's just like my POV as like a DPS
That's
as a
fair,
tank,
yeah.
but like maybe it's a little bit more engaging as a healer. Also, last boss was goddamn miserable, man. Holy shit. I think like the whole being huddled up and making sure you don't accidentally touch the wall because you're a melee, or if you like
Yeah,
impress
that was
or
bad.
something by accident. And yeah, I don't know. I didn't enjoy this dungeon whatsoever. This is super boring.
This also didn't do this dungeon a ton on live, but my hatred for this dungeon comes actually from the MDI this season. We were like I think this was the first MDI you could co-stream, I think. This expansion, season 1, and for some reason Shadowmoon Burial Grounds, as boring of a key as it was to do, it was the most boring key possible in the MDI. Like there was no route difference. You knew who was going to win by the time the first boss died with 100% certainty, and it was the most played dungeon in the map pools by like twice the next dungeon. It was so offensively boring that it made it go higher on my list just because of that experience, which is Dratnos' fault, of course, as a
Yeah, my
as a
bad.
caster. Casters do make that decision.
That's right.
Okay, so no strong supporters of Shadowmoon. What do we
Yeah, I
have?
mean, I think Bone Maw was literally the worst dungeon boss of all time. There was
Yeah.
actually like I know that people are like, oh haha, like falling asleep during a boss fight. So in around the time of Dragonflight, I was having some sleep issues and some other stuff going around in IRL. I genuinely fell asleep at my computer fighting that boss. Like I actually fell asleep in the middle of the boss fight.
Growl, what is your number 2?
My number 2 is the Siege of Boralus.
I believe that is the highest, right? Or
Yeah, looks like it.
Yes, that is the highest.
Yeah,
This is
we all have it.
This is currently number 1 in the rankings because we haven't gotten to the ones yet. But all right, Growl, take it away.
Well, there's just so many things uniquely wrong with this dungeon that no other dungeon could have achieved. First of all, it was different if you played Alliance or Horde. And if you played Alliance, the dungeon was actually harder for your group and you had to fight different, more miserable trash mobs. On top of that, talking about bad boss design, the second boss, the one that kept jumping on the ship and becoming invulnerable, and the last boss with the tentacles that you needed to free were probably some of the worst scaling bosses ever. The last boss genuinely would take groups anywhere from 7 minutes to even longer, depending on if you had to kill all the tentacles. It was just like it was so bad. And then on top of that, eventually people started learning what you would do is you would bolster the spotters and carry the spotter with you through the dungeon. And while any dungeon that you use it, like the dungeon mechanics to kill itself is bad, the mechanic of the spotter was so bad because it would just some idiot guy that would follow you around and just
Yeah.
circles on random people. And there were times where you get it and you're a healer and you're like, okay, I have time to run face first into this entire pack, and it's something that clearly wasn't really intended or thought through, and it ended up being a major part of the dungeon. Oh yeah, there was also a very easy pack that was in the back of the dungeon that you wanted to get, but it was only there if there was a world quest, or it wasn't there if there was a world quest. So randomly you would go into the dungeon, you'd be like, "Wait, my count's wrong. What happened?" And oh, it's the world quest today.
Also, the gate at the end of the dungeon would take a minute to open if you were Alliance, and would insta if you were Horde.
Yep.
Oh
That
my
was another
God.
really good mechanic. Oh yeah, and remember the RP mobs where there would be an alliance and a horde mob that were fighting, and if you get in combat with them, it kills them, but you don't get count. And so you have to make sure you tag the RP mobs one by one, but careful, if you get too close to them and you tag them, they cut you and they do an insane bleed and it just one-shots you in a high key, so don't go near those RP mobs.
Also, just the last boss, like, it was another one that scaled pretty miserably. You're just killing these tentacles. And your guys, they're like, "Oh, get this beast off me."
Yeah, if anyone didn't play that dungeon, the way the boss worked was there was like tentacles that attacked you and then a tentacle that you had to break to move on. But the problem is the tentacles scaled with tyrannical. And normally it would be like, okay, we all got our cooldowns, gun down the tentacle that we have to break. But on tyrannical, it was so highly tuned that you couldn't. Like you would just get overwhelmed if you ever tried to break that unless you literally had like bloodlust and everything. So you would actually just have to kill these attacking tentacles one by one, and you had to do like, you know, whatever, 3 times as much HP than normal because it's tyrannical and you couldn't burst it down.
And
Yeah, so
I have no rebuttal to all of that. I just want to point out that this dungeon is in the dungeon pool next season.
That's right.
up and Necrotic Wake.
And Necrotic Wake, yeah, 2
Banger.
dungeons that have featured on our list.
That's right.
Grimbatol.
Oh yeah.
Well, that's
Yeah,
never
so
been an M plus dungeon, so that couldn't go on our list yet.
Yep.
This dungeon, I mean, I would have put it higher because of how bad, like, everything that Growl said, but I just had such a good time in BFA that, like, I mean, it's kind of like the Legion dungeons, right? Like, I didn't put any Legion dungeons on my list as far as I know, but some of those dungeons stinked, and I don't know, I just had a really good time doing keys in BFA. And one thing that I will say positively about Siege of Boralus was how technical the dungeon felt, and when you were able to pull it off, it was pretty satisfying.
Oh.
But aside from that, yeah, it stinks.
Dude, I remember an MDI thing. I think it was Ben's team. Like everyone had like a way of doing Siege of Boralus, and then Ben played like a Vengeance Demon Hunter for the first time, and no one had done that, and he pulled. Their team pulled way more and was able to like make things. It was one of the like really cool MDI route optimizations to watch one time, and then you're like, okay, this sucks. I don't want to see this again. But for the one time, it was really cool.
Yeah, it was one of the more technical dungeons.
Yeah, and if they fix the Alliance Horde different stuff, that is like much of the problem fixed.
I mean, that part didn't even matter though, because like only Alliance suffered from that issue. But like, who the hell even played Alliance during that time? Because like Lamau,
Yeah,
no
that's
cross faction.
fair.
Is there a universe where this dungeon is brought back and they make enough changes to it to actually make it a good dungeon? I actually can't imagine that to be true. Because like
No, I think they could.
I don't think it's that, like, spotters are not that much of, also the affixes that were super offensive in here have gotten less offensive. Like bolstering, you would no longer, I guess you would still do some, but like the duration on it now would make abusing the spotters a little bit less.
I just think there's
Like, you
so many
wouldn't do it the way you
fundamental
used to.
problems, like the bosses but I mean, when they brought back Throne of the Tides, I would have guessed that that was like a dungeon I was sure was going to be bad, but then like that was the one where they made a lot of really good changes to it. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously tuning will be the end of that, but this dungeon isn't great. This is one of a few dungeons that was on all 4 of our lists. I think there's only like 2 other dungeons where that's true. Maybe it's about to be 3.
Vortex too, I think.
Yeah. Okay. We're moving on to my 2, which is, I believe, on one of your lists. Oh, 2 of your lists as well. This is Halls of Infusion. I think this is the highest it is on anyone's list.
Okay.
I think. It's on everyone's list except for Dorki's. My Halls of Infusion take is pretty simple. Absolutely fucking sucked until what I'm guessing is this season, because when I put this on my list, everyone in my chat was like, what do you mean Halls of Infusion is really good? And I just find that completely unbelievable unless it got much better this season. But
They got much better.
yeah, but I haven't played this season or watched anyone do it this season. So my entire take, very similar to Dratnos's. I think you had a similar take where you were like, I've only done it in this season, so this
DOS
is my
season 1.
Yeah, it was DOS season 1, right? Because you did it and do it without encrypted. Yeah, I just think Halls of Infusion fucking stinks in everywhere. I think the trash at the beginning, there's way too much going on, way too many casts. The extra phase of the boss at the end is insane. I believe these things are fixed now. The boss, like the mini boss and the bridge was just a pain. I don't think the I think the frog boss is actually like kind of cool, not too bad, but like the other boss where you just sit behind the icicles, super basic, even though it looks like a really fun healer boss. I just never enjoyed any amount of time that I spent in Halls of Infusion when it was in its current form.
Yeah, I mean, this dungeon got major improvements. I mean, it just goes to show like what they even need to do to make dungeons better. I think the last boss change was like one of the biggest changes they've ever made to a boss, to not feel completely awful. That went from like anywhere from 4 to 8 minute long boss down to like a 3 to like a 5 minute boss. It's like much more bearable now. The checkpoints much better. The tuning on the trash in the beginning is not as awful. The trash between the frog boss and Kajin is not as bad now. Like, I'd say Halls isn't really that bad, just because, like, the beginning, you're doing some pretty large pulls. It's pretty chill since the balls got nerfed. The bosses are, like, kind of interesting. I don't think any of them are particularly bad now, aside from maybe tuning's a little bit rough. It's a little bit too one-shotty. But yeah, like, I don't really think Halls is that bad now.
And this is all, yeah, this is all based... Almost all of that doesn't apply to the version that I'm ranking that existed before this season, right?
Yeah, it was awful before.
Yeah,
I agree.
And then Dratnos and Growl, you guys both have this on your list. Do you guys have anything else to add?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There were several other, like the release problem and run back. This dungeon offered at the start of the dungeon, they had this idea of you can go left and collect a cheat death from engineering, or you can go right and get a faster run back by being able to then like run through the pipes and stuff if you wipe, which I think anytime you're adding a run back like that is like as a incentive, that set them up for it to be really bad, because then they were unwilling to add a graveyard update. This season they did add a graveyard update, and now the dungeon is so much better. They also fixed the balls being way overtuned at the start of the dungeon. Like the 3-ball pull was extremely bad before, right? And now it's they do like half as much damage on their channel beam thing, and it is feasible to fight those things. So I don't know. I mean, they basically took like the 5 biggest problems with this dungeon and fixed it, and that's why on my list as well, I think it's only in that spot because of how it was that season. But as it is this season, it wouldn't make a top 10 list of worst dungeons at all. It's definitely fine now.
Growl?
Yeah, the run back, the respawn was like miserable, and I sort of like you say you give dungeons that were old a little bit more leeway. Dungeons that they literally just made who have this problem that we've been talking about for 8 years is like completely unacceptable at this point. Why they have this insanely long run back. I feel like there's so many mobs in this dungeon that are just very, very poorly designed. The frogs just like, it's supposed to be like a stacking poison that kills you, but instead the frog just melees you for half your health. And then if there's any sort of other affixes like Raging where you can't even see them, or like Sanguine where you're worried about healing mobs, they're just completely miserable. That room that just drops a bunch of frogs on your head, it's like, what are they even trying to do? Then there's the mobs that like do random like lightning zaps, and then if you ever let any of their casts go off, it just kills the group. The gauntlet from the 3rd boss to the 4th boss is just like, I get that they're trying to make it cool or whatever, but it's just so not fun and frustrating. The last boss has to be one of the worst bosses of all time. Like, even after the changes, it just does nothing. Like, it just sits there. It sits there, and its only mechanic is it just tries to one-shot you, and then you just live the one-shot, and then that's it. Okay, now you go do the maze. Like, I don't know, this is just... I think this dungeon, to me, is saved by the fact that the first 3 bosses are like pretty fun to heal and like somewhat fair, even if they're a little bit overtuned. I think those are coolish bosses, but other than that, like, God, this dungeon is not for me.
I think the biggest problem is there's no consistency with release points. Like, I don't understand how they approach checkpoints. And it's like, if you're someone who's inexperienced with the dungeon too, how are you supposed to know if you're supposed to release or not? Like, oh, you died at a specific spot.
So true.
And like, it's like, oh yeah, we should have released. I mean, checkpoint's right there. But then, the opposite is also true. It's like, all right, you just died and you instantly release. Then suddenly the group is mad at you because like, why the fuck did you just release? Now you're at the beginning of the dungeon and we have to wait until you run back. We can't even res you. So it's like, it's so inconsistent. I do not understand what their philosophy is behind.
Well, I think it's one of those things where it's like theme and like what another game designer would deem good game design besides like practical gameplay only thinking, where like to us it sounds only logical that it's like, all right, man, when you kill a boss, bare minimum, that's your new respawn point. It's literally never before that, right? Something like that. Or Obviously, if you've traversed like a long area and there's like some kind of RP to get you across, you would spawn there. For them, it's not weird that like on certain dungeons they try not to do that, and it's like, oh, if it's a dungeon where there's some portal mobs, maybe there's like a way you can talk to a guy at the beginning and he'll portal you somewhere like an Azure Vault, right? They like to do ways that would be like thematically true to the dungeon, but I think this is one of the examples of things where it is so important gameplay where you should just always make sure that it's not an awful decision to do that. Or you'd have to add some kind of like warning to the release thing, like you said, where it's like, hey, real quick before you release, the release point is like 500 yards away from your body. Are you sure you want to release? You know, like maybe that. I mean, the better solution is just to not have release points ever be super shit. But it is crazy that like almost no one's gonna actually know stuff like that, and then pressing release could just be key destroying, right? Or it could be super easy and someone should have done it faster.
There's just no consistency is like the biggest problem. Like, yeah, it makes sense, you know, like if Azure Vault, all there's the guy you can talk to teleport. Some just make literally no sense. Like Bracken Hide, why do you release at the beginning of the dungeon before, like after you kill first boss? It does not make any sense at all.
Like, and someone in chat actually had a good point where it's like, if you want to be like thematically accurate, or if you want to be like clever with the way that you can get back in a dungeon, just have that exist before Mythic Plus. Like Mythic Plus is obviously a thing that's like a repeatable, like whenever you're doing content that is repeatable, you have to approach things like that differently. And there should just never be a situation in Mythic Plus where you're releasing like a million yards away from your group. All right, that's Halls. Halls in 3 of our lists. Currently number 3. All right, it is Dratnos' number 1. What is your least favorite Mythic Plus dungeon of all time?
Spires of Ascension.
Hey, let's fucking go, same.
Oh, let's fucking go.
I also have that as my number
Let's
one.
go!
Holy,
Wait,
let's
really?
go,
That's
yeah.
crazy. Okay, I'm a
There it
fucking
is,
idiot
boys.
for having it at 5 then. All right,
Absolute dog
you
shit.
guys may all start your takes whenever.
All right,
I
there
will.
are
Don't
some-
worry about it. I got it.
All right, go.
First of all, this dungeon lagged your game. It was like, I don't know
Yeah,
if it
you
was like
literally
the
could not play the
fires
game.
or the ghosts. It actually, even your computer didn't like to be in this dungeon.
I'm pretty sure it
Spires of
fried some
Ascension-
people's GPUs back in the days.
Yeah, like this dungeon was like, it is just the absolute pinnacle of what makes Mythic Plus bad and like terrible design. The entire dungeon is just full of like mechanics and casts where it's like, if you don't stop this and do this right, you're just dead instantly. There's like the Goliaths that just blow up your team. There's the debuff that kills you in 1 tick. The cat bleed that kills your tank instantly. The spear throwers that hurl and kill your team instantly. Every single caster in the last area. There's the squad leaders that literally they have an anti-fun aura that makes it just for no reason just makes your AoE damage do less damage. Like what? And also, every single pack in the dungeon was just like random, uneven health mobs. And so you had to worry about bolstering, you had to worry about sanguine, because every single mob was a caster. But what can make this dungeon better? Let's just put tons of RP where the angel needs to carry you from platform to platform, so you can just really reflect how miserable you are in the dungeon. And then you get to the end of the dungeon, you kill the Goliath, and you're like, all right, I'm done. Nope, you ascend up the angels up to the top, and you just see 3 angels, and you may think that, okay, well, let's decide what we do here. Nope, if you kill 1 angel, it just full heals the other angels, so you just have to fight them 1 at a time. And it's just like, no, you're like, all right, I fought a boss and then 3 mini bosses back to back to back. What could be next? Only the worst design boss ever, where it's 7 minutes long and the only mechanic is a frontal that takes 5 seconds to charge up and then a dispel and then get in the shield and then rinse repeat. It is like the most boring section of any dungeon. It's just like, it's just so bad. But it is cool though. It's pretty as hell.
Yeah, it is a cool looking dungeon, that's for sure. Yeah, it was awful. Like the pugging experience too. If you do the beginning of the dungeon, you go into the first pole. It's fucking cognitive overload. There's frontals. There's dark lashes that you have to kick, otherwise you wipe. Or there's also the other mechanic. I don't remember what the hell it's called. There's like some dispel that just does like infinite damage. But there's also the Goliath that you have to kick, and if you don't kick the Goliath, then it's an auto wipe. And guess what? If it's Sanguine up, I mean, the Goliath is for sure gonna bathe in the Sanguine, and it's gonna be the worst experience ever. And then you get to all the angels that fly up in the air. If you're playing a melee, it was impossible to hit those guys. Otherwise, you had to like stand in some shit to figure out how to hit those guys. And the first boss too was awful. You couldn't ever see shit. People always got hit by the balls. The trees were in your face. Then there's the what do you call it? The angels that hurl spear. And a better way of saying fuck you is they just decide to randomly disengage. Like you go up to them so that they don't hurl spear. Then they just fuck right off and start hurling spear again. And just like every part of this dungeon was so bad. There was very little redeeming factor in this dungeon.
All this trash at the end is so bad, we're literally skipping it in the beta. Look at oh yeah, these mobs that would randomly just combat you with RPs. Like, we're all just confused. We're like, are we in combat? What is going on? The pack is just standing there. Like, all of this stuff was so bad.
Had items too.
Oh yeah, the spear.
Yeah, the spears.
But you only got 2 of them in the whole dungeon.
Yeah. Yeah, this is another one of those dungeons that like, oh, you have a left path or a right path. Which one are you gonna go? And like the right path mob sucked, but the left pack pulls sucked even more, so you just never did that. Oh man.
Left is always wrong. That's what I found out.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, also just any affix you can imagine. You already brought this up, but like sanguine, bolstering, necrotic, quaking, like every single affix that was bad ever was especially bad in this dungeon.
Yeah, the only thing I'll have to add is probably the only reason I don't have this higher is I just probably didn't do it as much. Very similar to Sanguine Depths, where I didn't do a lot of dungeons in Shadowlands in general. This was another one that I just, and why it's slightly higher than Sanguine is like I would have rather done this less than Sanguine. So we just put it on the list just out of respect for how bad Spires is.
Inspiring? You remember Inspiring in this dungeon?
Oh, dude, I forgot Inspiring existed.
Yeah.
God, they really wanted to stop you from pulling more than one mob at a time. Like they've
Literally,
been
this was a
going for that
dungeon
for
you
the
couldn't
longest
even
time.
pull a pack.
Yeah, there were a lot of packs
you
that just
couldn't
the
pull.
pack with the inspiring.
Well, you're
in it
supposed to
was
CC. You see,
impossible.
like you didn't get it back in Classic Kata. You had to CC the hard mobs and do it the right way. That's how dungeons were intended.
Okay, did you guys? I at least enjoyed this boss, the specifically this boss only. I think it's a bright
the
spot.
third boss.
Yeah, I like this boss.
Yeah, I think second
was
boss
alright.
as well wasn't that bad. Yeah, it was fine. Fun little dodge.
Yeah, this was weird.
Oh yeah, Pete always died.
Maybe-
Also,
so, like,
the triple angel pull, like Growl, you were saying you had to do all 3 of them separately. Depending on the key level and depending on the context, like you could do 2, right, and try and sync their deaths. That was at least some gameplay that was offered there.
I mean, like,
I think that's
realistically,
so bad,
How
though.
often would you do 2 angels though? It feels like
Yeah,
would
like
only
you
do
would
that
never do it in
like
high key, right? This was like
really.
this was
I
MDI
mean, even
or
for
weekly
pugging,
keys.
like there's no way you would ever do that.
Yeah, but
Oh,
like,
yeah.
yeah, but like, okay. So there's 2 things about that. Number 1, you could actually kill them all, but you had to kill them like at the exact same fucking millisecond
Yeah, it was like
or
1
something.
second or something.
Yeah, exactly.
too.
And that's like that. The fact that that's even possible, and like the alternative to that is bad, right? And even then, I just wonder. This is very similar to Shadow of Zul, where when you kill them one at a time, it's intended to be one long, difficult mini boss, right? That you have to kill before
Yeah.
the last boss. And I just think what Blizzard can maybe learn from that is the success chance of you've now done a whole dungeon and do this mini boss before the last boss thing has never been positive. In fact, it's usually overwhelmingly negative that they want you to spend a lot of time on really, really hard
Also,
mini boss for last boss.
If you just happened to, like, there was one that you could kill first, and then the next 2 would be so hard if you killed the one that's like spawns at the far left, looking at the end of the dungeon first. And then the next 2 were like nuclear difficulty because they inherited the
stacking
abilities of each
damage
other.
one, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, don't forget the spears that the mini bosses would throw, and it would like go out in like
Yeah.
cardinals or whatever. But the thing is, like, it wasn't consistent. It depended on the direction that the mob threw the spear at you, and so there'd be all these like random spears going in random directions. People like tried to game it throughout the whole expansion, and you just like never really could consistently do it. That's how ridiculous the mechanic was.
Yeah. All right, so Spires fucking sucks. Any last Spires thoughts? I mean, Spires gonna overwhelmingly win, I think.
Oh yeah.
yeah.
No. There's the angel on the last platform that was just giant and would block your camera, and so then you had to go get corgi goggles to turn the angel into a corgi so that you could see your
Yeah.
character.
You had the corgi goggles. You had the
Corgi
inky black in that potion as well, or in
Yeah.
that dungeon as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it was very bright.
Yeah.
I also to shout out Inky Black Potion. I think Inky Black Potion is underused and makes a lot of. It got a lot of use in this. Isn't it a Tindril thing? People use it on Tindril a lot.
Yeah, you could.
There's stinky bright potions now
Yep,
too,
that-
which is
people like that,
actually
like
pretty
Bracken.
cool. Yeah, you
Yeah.
should try and Bracken, you guys.
All right. So my number one, and I'm very surprised to only see it on 2 of our lists, and maybe it's because I did like the majority of my Mythic Plus in this expansion, so I saw it more. Like my Spires would have been higher if I had played more in Shadowlands. But my number one's Tol Dagor, for a lot of reasons, and I'm more so interested in hearing what kept it off a few of your all's lists in general. But I think maybe a bigger pet peeve of mine is, again, the whole killing. There's a reason Neltharus is on my list. The whole killing a bunch of mobs with items is in Tol Dagor, and at the worst case scenario, when you did this in the MDI, you did 80% of your trash count with a cannon. Like, that's insane. Not only was
but that's MDI.
True. You still did a large percentage even in on live, but
Yeah.
You had some awful boss fights. That Jess Howlis might be one of the worst boss fights ever. Either doing it correctly, where you like go around and have to do the trash beforehand or whatever, or if you do the thing where you pull them through the door, it's just like unintuitive nonsense. Abilities pulled things through walls constantly every time you did this dungeon. Maybe there was some kind of script to fix this. I think there was maybe something like that at one point, but you saw nameplates all the way through the dungeon basically the whole time. There were bright spots. Like, I think the last boss is actually really cool and really good. I think the first boss was also pretty nice, maybe other than the like unintuitive timing that you have to move when he jumps out and like tries to one-shot you kind of thing, but also the first trash. Also another positive maybe. I find myself giving it positives because I'm trying to guess why you guys left it off, but like it like maybe executed the theme of like this is a prison, and not in like the Maw of Souls way where like people's bit was like, oh, this is hell, so it's supposed to not be fun, but more in the like it actually does look and feel like a prison, and like they kind of nailed that. But I think all the negatives vastly outweigh the positives. I didn't enjoy doing this in the MDI. I didn't do a lot of high keys this expansion, so maybe this is MDI pilled and it was way worse for me. But I'm interested. So Dratnos, you have it on your list, and Dorki and Growl, you guys don't have it at all. What is your all's thoughts on Tol Dagor?
Yeah,
Okay,
I mean, I think.
so-
Well, you go ahead.
Yeah, so I love BFA, and this had a lot of what BFA encapsulates, especially at the beginning. Like, I think that first poll is one of the best polls in the game. It's
The trash
fucking
poll, right?
Great. Yep, especially because I played on Holy DK a lot during this expansion. You would pull the entire beach and then just explode, just like fucking jizz all over your screen and just like do billions of damage. Man, that was amazing. And the first boss was also the first boss was actually a pretty solid boss. I thought that boss was a cool boss. It had a good mix of everything, right? You know, it was like kind of technical, it had like interesting mechanics. It was like a bit of a healing required, bit of a tank damage. I thought that was a nice boss. And then, I mean, like, this dungeon is still extremely problematic. It's definitely on my contenders list, but because I had such a good time in BFA, I didn't put on the list, and I thought there were worse dungeons. Like, yeah, obviously there's all those problems that you guys mentioned with mobs falling through the wall or floor and stuff tagging through the wall, etc. But like the bosses I felt were okay. Like Just House was nothing, and then third boss was kind of interesting. Like we've never done a boss like that before, where you have to like move the barrels around and figure out how to face the boss, his frontals, etc. And last boss was like when it was super climactic. Some of my most memorable experiences back in BFA were people pushing the highest keys, especially on like the big push weeks, like the Dratnos push week extravaganza, where you would be watching all these teams going at it. And there was nothing more exciting than tuning into one of the teams, like say it was like Echo or like them. They're just in there, they're about to approach the last boss doing a world first key, and that was like one of the scariest bosses ever. Fucking Overseer, whatever the hell his name was. You would just have to do like a super technical boss on an extremely high level, and that was pretty exciting.
Yeah, I just want to echo the bosses in that dungeon were, I think, in general, good. Jess Howl is definitely a stinker, but it was just like a target dummy, right? Which I think is like one of the least offensive things you can be compared to
Yeah, if you're gonna be
bosses that are
bad,
really
be
unfair.
bad in the target dummy way and not the.
I think
super
first
annoying.
boss was a banger. I think it was really, really cool. And I think like depending on what you pulled, you can make it easier or harder depending on how much of the beach was free. The beach pull I think was like the best pull in the expansion. The camera was not great, but I will say in defense of that, BFA just wasn't really cluttered with that many ground effects and frontals, to the point where like you didn't necessarily need to have really good vision all the time in the jail, because there just wasn't really that much going on where you're like, you know, needing to dodge tons of frontals and swirlies. Like most of the mobs in the jail were either like hitting the tank or had a kick, and there was like a couple frontals, the gunshot guys, but they were like pretty slow and you could stun them if you needed time. time. I think the cannons definitely weren't great. I think, again, I'm not trying to say this is a great dungeon. I'm just trying to say why I think it's like doesn't deserve to be in the bottom. Yeah, again, the third boss I think was interesting. I think the last boss was another really, really good boss. And I think with regards to pulling stuff through the wall, I can completely sympathize with people who didn't play a lot of keys and who were pugging mostly and had just some idiot with some random ability pull through walls. But if you played with regular people or you played the game a decent amount, you would learn the spots that mobs would pull through and the abilities that would do it, and it didn't really be, obviously, again, terrible that it happened. I'm not trying to say that it's good, but like thinking about our high keys, like, there wasn't really that many times where it happened and it like ruined keys, and not so much as like, any other dungeon where stupid stuff happens.
Dratnos?
Yeah, I agree with almost all of these. I mean, for me, the most offensive part was just like, man, pulling stuff through the ceiling, pulling stuff through the floor was annoying. I don't know if you guys remember on Reaping season as well, but you would like trigger Reaping and then hop on some crates and stuff to bug out the mob like pathing to you. I don't know. The cannons
ghost cannon too.
The cannons were, the ghost cannons were funny the first week of Reaping. This was also the first week of Beguiling. There was a Void Emissary just out in the middle of nowhere with nowhere you could line it. That first week, Void Emissaries stacked their buffs on themselves rather than a debuff on you. So that was, I remember going in there on a key and just being absolutely brick-walled by a Void Emissary that had 5 stacks and was... we were just getting like 1 global each on it before dying and releasing and going at it again. The cannons were stupid. They did nerf them in a way that was also stupid, where they were like still powerful but had limited ammo, which in a way is like, okay, there's gameplay to that, but it made it even more like, I would say, fiddly and annoying. But it was somewhat fun to do that part right. I remember as well, also during Beguiling season, I remember I was playing Rogue with Diver's Folly, and I would like proc a Diver's Folly by autoing the cannon a few times, then hop in the cannon, shoot my 5 shots, and I could literally go up and one-shot the Void Emissary with the Diver's Folly discharge. So that was fun. The last boss was like, the last boss was hard. I was over various seasons of doing that key, like that boss was the breaker pretty often, right? Like you could be feeling good about your group, about your run, you could run into the last boss and like, oh, we're not actually able to do this, like, but it wasn't done fair, right? Like that was actually just it was sort of unfair, I guess, because you had the doubles thing, so sometimes you could just kill it because you didn't get any doubles, but like you could live even with a lot of doubles if you were really good, and you learned pretty quickly, oh, we're not actually really good, if that ended up killing you a bunch of times. So I don't know. I mean, there were some redeeming characteristics, but it was definitely, it was bad enough to make it to number 5 on my list. I agree with Max, like all the things you said were certainly big negatives about it.
I'm trying to look at these lists and find some like consistency or like figure out why some things are on there.
I actually think that our like the aggregate list we have over on the right is really good. I think this is one of the ones where like us together is better than us separately. It's a nice list.
What is the top? I mean, we all had, you could tell when we got like halfway through this list, when people started listing some of the top dungeons where everyone was like, I have this higher, I have this higher for like 2 straight minutes. You could kind of tell that there were some dungeons that are universally disliked, and I think most of those made this top 10. There was a few that were picked by like one person, and they picked them really high, so it ended up going on there. Like Tol Dagor, for example, if I didn't pick it, would have not made this list. King's Rest, if it wasn't picked by Growl, would have not been on the top, right? I'm interested, what are some omissions from chat? If you guys were to have thought about this before we started doing it, what are some dungeons you were sure were going to be on this list, but then were not?
Oh, there are some contenders for sure.
So Temple of Neltharios is interesting, right?
Yeah. That's one that I think was... that's one, to me, again, where it had boss fights that were kind of fun to heal. But yeah, Temple of Seth was like...
That was my number 11, actually.
I have a soft spot for dungeons where it's like the Omega Healer check boss of the expansion, whether it's like this one or the Sanguine Depths one or Halls of Infusion. I guess Halls of Infusion sucks, but yeah. I might be rose-tinted glasses not putting Sethralus on my list.
One big problem with Temple of Sethralus as well that affected people that weren't us, but like, man, if you went in there without a rogue and without like skips, you got 150% count by just holding W in that place. It was awful.
I actually decided, I thought of Temporal Sethless because I didn't appreciate doing it a lot, but also really, really weird interaction where, again, in BFA, I just only did MDI, never did high keys. I like didn't do Temple because it was not included in the MBI.
Yeah.
So like
Yeah, because of the eye bug.
yeah, so like my only experience was probably doing it once on like a lower difficulty, and then like I just assumed it was bad because they just like, how the fuck do you just not include one of your dungeons in the MDI? That's so weird. People saying Shrine too, but we like
Well,
Shrine.
yeah, I mean, yeah, we said this last time, right? Like,
Yeah,
people
Shrine had some good
absolutely
stuff and some
hate
bad
Shrine.
stuff, right?
I
It's just a question
fully
of how much you
understand
weight
it.
each one.
Yeah, for people
I
who,
think Shrine will have, like, sort of what Dratnos said about DOS Season 1. I think if you played Shrine Season 1 before they changed the mini-bosses, before people figured out good routes, when, like, the droplets would bolster and all that stuff, like, Shrine Season 1 was pretty fucking brutal.
not to mention
So, I
Shrine
mean,
Season
yeah.
1 had fucking Infested. So like if that was
Yeah.
your only experience, it also would have been with arguably the worst seasonal affix ever.
Also,
so.
that was the only dungeon where like teaming was really obnoxious. Or not the only dungeon, but it was a dungeon where teaming was super bad.
BFA was just great.
Yeah, so Shrine
Like,
for-
but like if I was gonna include some, I would also include DHT. That shit fucking stinks.
definitely lost points when it got brought back, and it also made me think about what dungeons could they bring back from Legion with minimal changes that we would be generally fond of now, but then really dislike if they brought them back.
Yeah, I mean that's some of the BFAs. I think.
Just 8 years ago.
Like I would also put Arcway. Arcway was like way too fucking long. That shit dragged on. Arcway was kind of cool
Dude.
the first time I did it. I remember like I thought it was cool back in like the beginning of Legion, but it was definitely not a dungeon that stood its time.
It's we would be so mad about like the one shots on Fel Lord Zakum now as well if that dungeon came back.
Oh, I also want to add one thing, and this is not for you guys not putting on your list or you guys putting it on your main list, but I just want to point out how insanely fake chat is. How many viewers we have? I think we had like 5,500 on Twitch earlier, and we had like 2,000 or 3,000 on YouTube. So like almost like
Holy shit.
9,000 people. And when you guys were here for the previous list, which actually, by the way, was the top 10 Mythic Plus dungeons, it had like 60% of the viewers because you guys are all attracted more to negativity than positivity, but all good. You guys were talking about how Sanguine Depths should never be on anyone's list, and Sanguine Depths is so bad, and I hate Sanguine Depths. And you guys saw Dorki and Growl put it on their top list last week. And now when someone brings up Sanguine Depths, you're just like, oh, yeah, of course. I mean, if you didn't like Sanguine Depths,
yeah,
I mean,
of course, man.
I mean, you must have just not been very good at it. It's just insane how
of
much
course.
this changed from week to week and how all of you changed your opinions based on two people telling
know.
you that.
I mean, they're just based chatters. That's all.
Max, I don't think you should be allowed to have an opinion on these dungeons. Like, you only did them a couple times or something for a few of them, and
True.
also you're an elitist too, so
That too, yep.
that also, those two things at the same time mean your opinion's not valid.
Yup.
Yep. Yeah, I'm trying to think of another one. I'm surprised you guys didn't put Mist on here. High key opinions usually had like Mist's like turbo low, right? Like really low. I remember I thought about maybe
Stinks, but
yeah, I thought
I think
about
it has some redeeming factors. That's why.
yeah. What else is another one? Oh, Seat of the Triumvirate, I guess. Right? I mean, people initially
Yeah.
typed that in my stream. They were like, Seat won't
Seat
be.
and Cohen both are like the worst things that happened in Legion takes.
I mean, that's like Sanguine Depths. Only the noobs hated it.
Yeah, well, Legion had the really big thing of like you developed a lot of mastery with the first season's worth of dungeons, and then the later ones came out overtuned and with an increased amount of complexity. And so, like, you just, if you were running those keys, they were way harder, right? And that made people not like them, I think. But honestly, I think especially Cohen would be a good candidate for refurbishment.
Yeah,
Even Seat.
If they
Not a
were
bad
to
base.
bring Cathedral of the Eternal Night back into Mythic Plus, it would be one of the best dungeons ever with almost no changes. I think Cathedral and Seat were both ahead of their time, but I think Cathedral is notably better than Seat. Cathedral is fucking cool, like really good. People say Arcway. If you bring Arcway back, I know Dorki, you mentioned that. Just because it's like really long. I don't think there was a lot of things about Arcway that were offensive, right? It was just really long.
Yeah, it was kind of just like a whatever dungeon. It was just it dragged on way too long.
Someone in YouTube chat said Ruby life pools. I could see that for people because like it is one that was like really punishing. I think specifically for healers, depending
And
on
tanks is like depending on your like the prop warriors against the first and second bosses, you're just getting bleeded and magic damage to death. It was pretty rough.
Dude, I did a little dungeon tournament yesterday, and Ruby was one of our like TGP style, and Ruby was one of our 4 dungeons. And I fucking loved being in Ruby. I had so much fun in there. I feel like
Yeah.
Ruby is great. People
Yeah,
wanted to
Ruby's
see Uldaman more, only on one of our lists and at the 10 spot. That it was surprising. I'm surprised Uldaman wasn't on there more.
Lots of people dislike Uldaman, but like I said, I I thought Uldaman was intense, and it was definitely like a noob farming dungeon. I don't dislike it that much. I just don't like the tuning on Uldaman, which I guess like is kind of a big deal. The bosses are just way too much.
All right, I think that's about what people. Someone said why not court. Someone had Cortastars. Oh, more Grimrail. Yeah, Grimrail was so hated that. Dude, people hated Grimrail so much they like totally tricked themselves into thinking that like letting the community vote on things is bad because people picked Grimrail, as if that was like a bad decision because people don't know what they're talking about. But like when they asked for that vote, like the last time Grimrail existed, it didn't exist when affixes were a thing, and it was definitely for challenge modes one of the best 2 dungeons you would have done in WoD, right? So like people voting for Grimrail wasn't people trolling, which was the expectation or what people were assuming by that. It was like people just picked their favorite dungeon from that expansion and didn't really think about how it would apply to Mythic Plus. But I mean, that just shows you how hated that was. Like people fucking hated that dungeon. Oh, there was another one. Wasn't there another? People keep saying Violet Hold. That wasn't a Mythic Plus.
That was never an M+ dungeon.
Yeah. I think Violet Hold would be an aggressively bad Mythic Plus dungeon if they ever did that.
That's a good decision that they made in not an dungeon.
Someone said Everbloom. I think Everbloom was some of our honorable mentions for being in the best 10. I think Everbloom's.
Yeah, Everbloom owns.
Only problem is like the affixes on the plants kind of thing. I don't know.
The boss fights were like nasty as well, like last 2 bosses on Tyran.
All right, chat. You guys have a couple minutes to think about this. Do a 2-minute poll. You guys have to vote with the list that you most agree with for your most hated dungeons. I think it's going to be Dratnos usually is Man of the People. I'm trying to think what they wanted to say. I think it might be Growl because they all hated King's Rest and like no one put that on the list except for Growl.
I've King's Rest on my list higher than Growl.
Oh shit.
Man of the People, man of the people.
Maybe Growl or Dratty. 1 second.
I feel like Max was going for the win here, so if Max doesn't win, this is going to be a huge L.
It's really embarrassing because like ours are our authentic.
Well, I already know. I know I'm not going to win because when I typed Sanguine because of the propaganda from last week, they were all like, "Oh no, that dungeon's actually good." I don't know if you heard.
I'm not going to lie. I agree with you, actually. That was pretty fake of chat. Same way with them spamming Growl.
Do you remember what they were posting? Do you remember what they were posting when the first one of you wrote Sanguine Depths? It was pure negativity. No, you're so wrong. Fuck that dungeon. It's so bad. And then as soon as the second one of you put it, they're like, well, if 2 of them put it, it must be. And then a week went by, and now they're like, yeah, I mean, if you just don't like Sanguine, do you even know what you're doing in there?
The thing with your chat is sort of like a life lesson, actually, is you just got to have a lot of confidence. Like, if you just come in there and you put a dungeon in there and everybody starts being like, what are you talking about? And then you just, like, make some funny jokes, do a funny voice about it, you turn them all on your side, and they're all like, yeah, I thought that all along.
Yeah, I didn't realize Spires of Ascension was bad until I saw this.
No, the secret is Dorki. You just got to talk with a deep voice all the time, then no matter what, everyone just agrees.
That's right.
The question is,
you guys are wrong, I'm right.
The question is, were they caught with the Sanguine Depth things or taught? Were they caught or did they learn? They were able to see with a different perspective. Oh no shit, you think that?
It is also Growl has got a high risk name because he's got both a W and an L in his name. None of us have.
Yeah, but the L stands out. You know, it's like how.
Yeah.
You can flip all the M's in my name, and you can flip them, and they're all W's with no sign of an L.
Holy shit! Are you just the winner?
A couple of them. It is a dead heat right now between Dratnos and Growl, actually.
Guys, but vote for Growl. It's okay. I've had it.
No, that's the sympathy thing. They're gonna vote for you more because they think you're being humble.
Let's all vote for Growl. New Man of the People. Yeah, there we go. That's good. I'm voting for Growl right now.
Dude, it's actually so true. But when I wonder if I could go back in time, how different this would look if I didn't start this with, I think it's going to be between Dratnos and Growl, and then those two ended up being in a 50-50. I wonder what are the main reasons for that. Like I'm looking, so like Dratnos. Okay, this is really interesting because Dratnos, they hated King's Rest. Dratnos has King's Rest higher than Growl. He has Uldaman, which from the looks of chat, all of them, they want it on all of our lists.
I'm not going to get that many points for having it at 10 though, right? Like 10 is barely.
Yeah, but no one else had it at all. I would assume you had Tol Dagor, which is definitely a chat disliker.
I'm actually surprised Dratnos didn't win.
Yeah, me
King's
too.
Rest at number 2, Tol Dagor on there. Like he had all the right ones, and then he also had just like the really
maybe
hard ones
Growl did pop off more when he was talking about dungeons he disliked. Like he just like fucking ranted on that shit for like 2 minutes. So like maybe
Growl had more pash.
Maybe it's the confidence thing.
Deserved. Yeah.
Growl does end up winning with 223 votes, 42% to Dratnos' 38.
Can you edit in just like a really, really loud noise again to just wake anybody up for
wait, what happened?
Falling asleep to this video?